call the meeting of the planning board January 13th to order. Let's see, we'll call Mary Foley.
Here.
Peter Morton.
Here.
Hugh Philbrick here. Sarah Craig present, Chris Olney.
Here.
Warren Brewster.
Yeah.
And Laura Kenny.
Here.
Here as well. Great, thank you. Unfortunately, I have to keep admitting people from the waiting room, so hopefully I can, if anybody sees people waiting in the waiting room or get a text or anything, let me know. I'll try to keep an eye on that. So next, so if you can just remind Shannon when he sets that up to not have a waiting room, that'd be great.
Okay.
The first item on the agenda, find, we have a copy. Is to approve the minutes from the October 28th, November 12th, and December 9th. Were people able to find them in the meeting folder, but others were able to find them?
I saw them in the meeting.
Yeah, I think.
My meeting folder, that's so weird.
It was all three that I listed.
Okay, well, I have a copy here. So.
Oh.
I have a copy of, let's take them in order. Do we have the 28th? October 28th? Somebody had some, maybe you want to make a motion for October 28th minutes? People have a chance to look at those.
Yeah, I'll move to.
Peter moves, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstain? Laura abstains.
Didn't have that one.
Okay. I'll take the motion for November 12th. 2024.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Abstain? Okay, and December 9th. A motion?
Move to approve.
Sue moves, Peter seconds. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anybody abstaining?
Actually, were you here for the ninth?
Yep,
Oh, okay.
I was gonna ask, I'm sorry.
yep, Peter was here, or at least according to the minutes. Gordon was online, yes.
I was just gonna ask where the 1125 went.
Yeah, but we're still waiting for 11:25. The cell signaling approval, so.
Yes, I was waiting
That's the
to
one I was.
Okay.
submit that concurrently with the.
Special permit. Okay,
Exact.
great, thank you. We usually also, acknowledge, correspondence. We had, some emails, one from Lorraine Iavoni, couple from Christine Delicio, 126 School Street. You didn't,
No.
oh, you,
When
okay, I'll forward it.
I
It's,
saw the
Ethan.
Liz
Liz, Thomas.
and one Lorraine.
Okay, I'll forward the ones from Christine Delicio.
Great.
Any other, correspondence? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I thought the planning board had agreed that we were gonna put correspondence and the resident and the topic on the agenda.
The correspondence and what?
The who sent it and the topic.
We did agree we were gonna acknowledge correspondence and it didn't make onto the agenda. You're correct.
So
So,
I don't know if Shannon's on, but can we going forward have that on the agenda? And there's a few that I think we should discuss. So I don't know if you want to discuss them now or later.
we'll discuss them at the right time in the meeting, or if we don't get to it, we'll discuss it, later in the agenda.
Okay, because there's other correspondence you didn't list, so.
Okay, and what are those?
So we received, on 12/21, received a correspondence from Elizabeth Thomas regarding the CST blasting occurring before 10 a.m. January 6th, January 8th, January 9th from Christina Delicio concerning a 2-entrance curb cut illegal on School Street. Then we received another email on 1/9 from Elizabeth Thomas. And these have been going to the planning board and the select board. That I had responded to, assuming she had had many responses, and hopefully some remedy to the issues, but that hasn't been going on, so I think it is important that we discuss it as a planning board tonight. That we need to be clear where the special permits and the timing and when the conditions are set, and that they're filed correctly. And then I sent an email on January 10th, open meeting law complaint. And then Lorraine Iavani sent an email today, January 13th, regarding the SJC rulings and guidelines. And, where do we go from here, since we based our zoning and vote on mathematical calculations that may or may not stand. So we can definitely talk about that during that topic.
Okay, thank you for that summary. That brings us to the MSBTA zone update. Mark or Sue or Chris, want to summarize that for people who haven't seen the update?
I'm happy to talk about it. The SJC did rule, and they ruled that the law was constitutional. No violations, so the law stands, and the Attorney General has the power to enforce it, just like every other law in the Commonwealth. And they specifically said that all towns and cities that the law applies to are required to comply with the law. They also said that the EOHLC had not followed the state required procedure when they issued their guidelines. They did not comment on the substance of the guidelines, only the procedure in which they were promulgated. And so they said they're not enforceable. And so there was a statement from the governor that new guidelines would be issued last Friday and they would be immediately enforceable, but nothing was issued. I reached out to EOHLC today and just received an automated response. So I don't know when the guidelines will be issued.
Okay,
So Sue, what's the import of that? What was the import of that? I read that too. It's a yes, yes, and a no. What does it mean? So what does that mean?
Well, we received, I don't know if you read the memo from KP Law.
Okay.
I would leave it to them to figure out what it means. But the law stands and we have to comply with it.
Okay.
and we believe we are in compliance
Yes.
based on our zoning.
Personally, this is just my opinion. I would be shocked if when the guidelines are issued, they are more lenient than they were before. I would expect they will be exactly the same. They will just go through the proper procedures that they didn't follow before. But if when they are filed, it does give us and every other town an opportunity to comment, just like we were able to file comments last week on the ADU regulations, which I hope everybody did. I know Sarah did and I did. It gives us an opportunity to comment and recommend suggestions that will benefit us. So I think it's worth everybody thinking about that and being ready when the guidelines are issued or the new guidelines are posted.
Yeah, so once they're posted, we might want to put that on our agenda and collectively as a planning board, make comments if we have comments about how they could be
Better for us.
better for, clearer, because there were some things that are not, that were a little bit wonky about them, but but they, I don't know, that it seems like there's no action that we would take
Until
Um,
they post them.
until they post them.
Okay, so is a procedural thing more than
It was, yeah.
content or the
Yep.
applicant?
No, there was no comment on the substance.
Wow, okay.
And I mean, again, this is just me, but one idea I would comment on is, the confusion regarding the restriction on age, that we want that to be in our benefit. It was recommended that we were fine and got opinions that we were fine, but let's have them make that clear, things like that. I think we have an opportunity to think about those things.
So just a broad, little context here. What does that mean to Milton?
You gotta ask. I can't comment on
I'd
Milton.
be interested to hear what it means. I was
They
at
have to
Milton when I
comply.
read it, but-
They do have to comply, that's for sure, yeah.
Were they silent about whether they're in which community they're in, the train or the fast transit?
That wasn't even argued and before the SJC.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
Milton sort of gave up on that. I
Huh,
mean,
interesting.
doesn't mean people in Milton have given up on that, but they did not pursue that.
Okay, so, if someone were to come with an application for a multifamily home in a CHOD, they would follow our zoning, correct?
Yes, they would follow the new zoning that's been
The new
adopted
zoning would
by
be.
town meeting, therefore it's in effect.
And just one other thing, just clarifying question here, because I'm thinking about the ADU bylaw. One of the things is if they promulgate these regulations and have a compliance deadline of May 1st. We would be in a lot of hot water if we hadn't already passed things, because we wouldn't be able to possibly start from scratch with a compliance plan for an April town meeting to comply with May 1st. So we don't know those deadlines, presumably, and that was one of my comments on the ADU regulations, for example, is like, you haven't even figured them out, and we gotta get this, if we're gonna comply in April, we need to know. So so we're in good shape, I think. And we may-
I suppose there is in the world of possibilities, the guidelines could come out more restrictive and we would be out of compliance. But I find I would find that very hard to believe.
Yeah.
It seems that a comment that is don't punish the people who met the December deadline.
So
Uh,
question, or a couple comments. First, people are waiting to get in.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
And I mean, I would assume they'd come out pretty quickly with the guidelines, but well, because if it has to go through the process, it's not gonna be quick, but what we submitted, and I guess this is a question to Mark, what we submitted to the AG at the beginning of the proposed bylaw says, we're doing this bylaw in accordance with 48(3)(a). And 3A is the 3-paragraph law that says, has to be within a half mile of the train station, et cetera. Our LCD zoning does not comply with that, as do some of the other areas. How can the AG approve something when there's no guidelines and the only thing we're going off of is 48(3)(a)? If what we proposed is not in compliance with that, how could they approve what we presented to them?
Well, our zoning stands on its own, so I don't know.
So I guess, so if,
This is
So I'm
your
just-
interpretation, Mary. I
Yes.
mean, have we received that interpretation from town council
what interpretation?
regarding the LCD?
Well, all I'm saying is,
You just said we weren't in compliance.
if our proposed bylaw is saying we're going by the law 48(3)(a), and currently there's no guidelines attached to that law, and we've put things outside of the half mile, is that in compliance? That's my question. And so I'm asking how the AG I guess they would approve it because
We don't know. We can't, I don't think we can,
So we might be
interpret-
in limbo, and so I'm just questioning as a town, maybe we say to the Attorney General, why don't we just put a stay on this or whatever the legal term is to say, you know, let's wait until the final guidelines come out before we submit our zoning
But
bylaw.
we have a town meeting vote of 72% that passed a zoning change. So how can the planning board overrule that?
I'm not saying as a planning board, I just said as a town, we kind of say, listen, we voted on guidelines that are no longer guidelines.
Why
So,
don't-
You didn't vote on guidelines, you voted
Voted on
on
zoning.
a zoning bylaw that stands on its own.
we
And you,
voted
and the
on,
zoning bylaw was required to be submitted to the AG's office within a certain number of days after town meeting, and that was done, as was the
Permission
compliance
to,
right, and so
to
just like every other,
EOHLC. Now, EOHLC may not be able to say we're in compliance until such time as they re-adopt the guidelines as new guidelines or regulations, however they're supposed to do so.
so,
but
and.
The AG can rule on bylaw.
And I would, you know, just like every other member of the board, I'm raising a question and a concern that I came across because, again, our bylaw is pretty clear. It's just we go with 3A, 40A, and there are no guidelines. So you know, having attack, I'm asking questions that we should all kind of be asking. This isn't
I'm
a,
not asking it.
let's pile on, let's give the looks. This is kind of saying, hey, wait a minute, now we voted on something that had guidelines attached to it, and we have no guidelines.
okay.
So,
Can I suggest
it's a
that we,
legitimate question.
I think we don't know the answer to that and that town council has sort of said, hold. So, and we're not that, if we're gonna take action, it would be at April town meeting and, you know, so let's wait and see what the next steps are from EOHLC. Sarah has something
Yeah,
she's been wanting to say.
So the ZBA has always been told that when we have a zoning change, we cannot rule on anything that's impacted by that zoning change until the Attorney General approves it. So I don't
Yeah,
believe that
okay.
if you received a building permit today, that it could be acted on, that you'd have to wait. And if the Attorney General approves it, it's valid zoning. It makes no difference. What they're doing at EOHLC, it's purely zoning, so.
Waiting for the,
It would be in effect once the Attorney General.
okay.
Signs it.
All right, we have a lot to do tonight. I think is there any action we need to take tonight on this matter?
Not on this matter, but I think what we've done with, or I know what we've done with other subcommittees, task force, when we, and this would be with the planning board or the select board as well, is we created a task force.
Show someone it's like, oh, this is funny, but like,
Whoever's on to mute.
Is we created a task force for a task that is now completed, and then we have to vote for the dissemination of the task force. So it's not just hanging open.
Okay, we can put that on a future agenda. We might want to keep the task force in place to make comments on the regulations and take any actions. So we can,
I think when I raised that with Greg, he said that the select board had to be the one to do the dissolution, not us.
Sarah, I don't know if you're taking questions, but there is one.
yeah, I know, like, we're not gonna, I don't think we have any action to take tonight, so we'll take comment at the end of the meeting. Okay, let's look at the next item on the agenda is to discuss possible zoning changes for Springtown meeting. At the last meeting, we came up with a list that is shown on the agenda. It's accessory dwelling units, commercial on the first floor, an overlay district to do that, associate planning members, floodplains, the introduction of zoning, the D2 zone, and site plan review applicability. So Mark and I chatted and we wanted to try, as we talked a little bit about, well, first of all, in order to get something on the warrant, we actually have to finish it pretty much by the end of February or hold meetings off cycle in order to post the 3 weeks and then have a public hearing at the last meeting in March, so that then we have time to get to the warrant. So you can do the math. There are 4 meetings to get all of these things done, or those that we can get done. So our thought is if we have a discussion about what we want to achieve, then we can ask Mark, with the assistance of town council, to draft the bylaws to achieve those objectives rather than us trying to, and then we get a draft and look at it. So that's how we're gonna try to proceed. So I thought we'd start with the accessory dwelling unit discussion questions. So I put in the packet some just discussion, things to think about, and I'm hoping we can kind of say where we want to head. By way of background, the state housing law added a provision for protected use ADUs. Those that are 900 square feet or half the primary dwellings square feet, whichever is smaller. And the EOHLC has promulgated some draft regulations. The comment period for those ended on Friday, and there was a public hearing on Friday. And it's my opinion, I think, Sue, you probably share this opinion, that they have some work to do to finalize their regulations, which are supposed to be finalized by February 2nd. But nonetheless, they are moving ahead with a protected use by right ADU. And in single residential districts, those are districts that have single residences allowed as well as other uses allowed. And one of the regulations confusing points is whether or not ADUs are by the regulation allowed in a duplex or a multi-family house, and that came up. So we can just acknowledge that that's currently a open question in how EOHLC is moving ahead. Does anybody else want to speak to what we currently understand about the protected background of the protected use ADUs?
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, of
Sarah?
course.
But this is an amazing document after all the stuff we went through with the MBTA.
Right.
And this goes
I know.
broad brush everywhere. But this is not just a residential zone they're talking about there, but it could be in any zone.
That's one of the comments. Yeah, that's one of
That's,
the open
so it's
questions.
everywhere, anywhere, if there's a residence in the commercial
If
zone.
single use is allowed.
Yeah, wow.
Which is not
Which is
LCD.
not in the LCD.
Which is
not-
So it would be every district in our town except the LCD.
But the open question is whether they're allowing an ADU in all buildings. One of the questions is a commercial build, a Crosby's. Could that have a ADU on it? So that was, could Zax's, what we call Zax's, have a ADU on it?
Oh, could it? It's not a primary residence.
Well, I
Anyway.
think they'll sort that out.
Yeah,
They heard that
maybe be
over and
more
over.
explicit with it.
So I think the presumption is that the intent was to be in single family dwellings. But that is not how the regulations. But nonetheless, we can't solve that here. So the question that I put forward to try to scope what we want to get done by an ADU bylaw is, do we want, whatever the protected use ADU law language is in the regulations, whatever that's going to be, do we want to adopt the state's language, or do we want to be larger, less restrictive? Because those are our choices, right? We can't be more restrictive than the state's rules. So
Specifically, what are
yeah.
you referring to?
Well, I'm thinking 900 square feet or
Instead of
half,
being
the-
900, make it like they're,
like it could be 1,200 if
They
we
said
want it.
1,200 in
Or
there.
it
They
could
used that as an
be-
example.
3,000, whatever, you know, and you
We
know,
do have the opportunity to make it more restrictive by eliminating its use as for short-term
right,
rental.
the
Oh,
second
yeah,
topic,
yeah.
yeah, there's a
That's-
couple of,
That's in the law.
that's in the
yeah.
law.
In the law,
Yeah.
and that's something that we could do.
That's my second
easily.
question.
And it's the state definition, which is 31 days or less. It's a short-term rental.
Yeah.
Not our 6 days.
Right. So before we get to short-term rentals, I want to talk about protected use ADUs. Do we want to make them less restrictive than whatever the state comes up with? Mary?
Thank you. So some of my comments would be that we would require the same setbacks as we do for current residential structures, that we don't have the accessory structure setbacks, which can be 5 feet, which would be pretty close. So if a garage becomes an accessory dwelling unit or some such thing, that protecting them and their neighbors, that we require further setbacks. I agree with the short-term rental ban, and I guess I kind of had a question that we allow any sort of earth removal and digging for foundations. If somebody, well, never mind, I'll ask that question next time. But so, and with the size, I think that probably merits some discussion. I think it would still be a good idea, since this will be part of the requirement going forward, is to get a handle on our current ADUs and the sizes and kind of extrapolate out from there what is reasonable for size. And that, I mean, I think it's inherent, but not super clear in the law, that these can't be sold separately, and, that's obvious zoning, but some people aren't aware of that type of thing. And I thought I did read in there that we can request a moratorium by claiming we need more time to develop this ADU bylaw. I mean, this is in effect February 2nd, so if we want to put a hold on development happening on February 2nd, we should ask for a moratorium.
A couple of comments just from things from the hearing. There was definitely comments on both sides of the ownership question. Again, the regulations were unclear. There was a comment about what defines the gross square feet and whether or not basements were part of that. So again, I
They
think we'll
actually included that, so our basement is part of
be
the
part of this, but there was arguments that shouldn't be. So that,
argument that it shouldn't be.
yeah, so so I'm just telling you what came up in the hearing. I'm not saying what's gonna happen. And I did not hear anything about a moratorium in the regulations, more, in contrast, most of the comments that came at the hearing that I heard, and I stayed for most of it, was, this is great, do it faster. Was sort of so I don't know what the process would be for a moratorium, but we could, if we felt that was important, we could ask council, seems to me. So I guess to my first question, how do we define protected use ADUs? And one of my other questions that I asked was bulk and size and setbacks. Should they be less stringent than the primary dwelling?
Less.
Less stringent. So we'll share it. So I think I've heard Mary say, she recommends being the same as primary dwelling for setbacks.
I think more people are trying to get in.
I just let them join. Waiting.
there were people in the hearing that made Mary's comment about the setbacks being that.
Yes.
Um, there was a wide range.
There was a right.
What was the general comments? Did it say make them less restrictive than
It was everything.
There was everything.
everything? Make them more, make them less, make them the same.
Then you had, well,
So it seems to me at a minimum, we have to get rid of our current bylaw because that's not enforceable and replace it with something at least that reflects what the state's gonna say. And I think adding the prohibition against short-term rentals is probably fine. And I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea to have some sort of a mechanism with a special permit to allow, for example, people to have a short-term rental or to have things with, and above their garages, even if the setback is less than for a primary residence, but do it with a special permit, so there's some flexibility. And I also think bigger ones is probably by special permit also.
That was another question I had, is that, you know, one is by right, two or more is a special permit. I wasn't super clear. Can you restrict how many on a
Unclear.
lot? Because, you know, obviously you have to meet the impervious and the setbacks and everything else, but could somebody with like a big side yard just have?
Unclear.
unclear.
Unclear in the regulations.
So,
One of the comments.
I mean, I guess. I mean, we'd have to ask residents and, you know, take a poll or whatever, but, you know, do people want to see more than one ADU per lot?
So it seems to me that what we're trying to do here is to do something where we're gonna put forward a bylaw that complies with the protected use ADU and perhaps a second bylaw that limits the use of protected use ADUs, perhaps all ADUs, I'll come to that in a second, for short-term rentals. That those are sort of the big picture. And what I'm trying to do is say, and then we have what Chris said, which is, do we need to fix our existing ADU bylaw at the April town meeting? Because we want to be successful here. And then the other question that I have for council is, we have a lot of properties, or a number of properties, I don't know how many, that have apartments that were approved, that were grandfathered, that exist prior to the ADU bylaw, right? What you're saying now?
No, the majority were built in accordance with the bylaw for employees only.
Employees, right?
Because that has been on the books for a long time,
Right.
but nobody's monitored it.
That's right,
So
that
they're
is my-
being rented like they shouldn't be.
right. So that's the second thing. And then things that maybe pre-exist that bylaw, or that came into effect under the 9.1.2, which is very few of those because of the requirements in the existing ADU bylaw. So my question for council is, if a second ADU requires a special permit, does employee housing, do those existing things, are they ADUs? Or is that property a duplex? We don't know.
I think you're complicating it.
Maybe, well, it might not be if it's
They,
only allowed in a single family home.
this law is addressing the ADU by right.
Yes.
It's not addressing any of our existing ADUs because they don't comply with the by right. But my suggestion is you have one bylaw for ADUs. You have the minimum requirements of the state. And if you have anything that's larger than that, it's a ZBA special permit, like it is today. But I also would put a cap on the maximum.
On the size.
On the size, because what we're seeing is residential use, not an ADU, but residential use in garages within the setbacks And we're seeing large ADUs. And it seems realistic that one would have, you know, maybe a cap of 2,000 square feet. Say if it's over 900, up to 2,000, special permit. And I think the other thing that needs to be addressed is the height. So accessory structures are 1.5 stories, residences are 2.5. And I think you've got to have something in your ADU bylaw regarding the height. And I definitely agree with Mary on using the setbacks for a primary residence. Because we're seeing before the ZBA, so much abuse of people trying to expand into the setbacks. And the whole purpose, the reason behind having accessory dwellings with a smaller setback is they never envisioned that people would live in the accessory structures. And now they're being used for family space. So I would even go as far as saying any accessory structure with any habitable space in it would be a primary dwelling setback
Well,
over and above the ADU. You wouldn't need a kitchen, just if you're gonna use it.
because it's that whole circular thing perhaps of what then people might just erect a garage because they get the 5-foot setback and then come back and say, oh, on the second floor, I want it to be an ADU. Well, the structure's already built and it's,
No, but
Not
if you had something in your bylaw that had the restriction on habitable space,
So it has
that
to
gives
be-
us something the ZBA to look
that
at.
you couldn't convert then a garage to.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly saying, well, the intent of the town is we don't want to convert these structures to habitable space. We
Well,
don't
they
have
could-
anything today.
They could if it's a by right 900 square feet, if they just mark off 900 square feet.
Not if we say it has to comply with the primary structure
Well, it
setback.
won't go in front of the ZBA. It's by right.
It has to still have a building permit, which has to
Okay.
follow zoning.
So let's just get a sense of the board on a couple of things here. First of all, to your comment about height. The draft regulations, I believe, say you can't restrict height, the height can't be more restrictive than primary residence.
But the statute doesn't
It's
say
not in
that.
statute.
about that.
Right, okay, so we have to wait and see on that one.
It's saying, yeah,
So this, we have to wait on it. Some of these things we can say we want to have it be accessory structure, but if the regulations, final regulations say primary structure, we're gonna have to, for the protected use ones. So, so let's just, can I go back to my original question, which is the protected use ADUs? Do we want to be more lenient or take this, whatever the state comes up with as their definition? Do we
Make it
want to
900
bigger,
or make it more.
or do we want to make it, bigger, lesser setbacks or, greater height? Those would be kind of the kinds of things, Laura.
The one place where I might make an exception in terms of going harder is still capping it at 900 feet, but if the baseline is the basement counts as part of that 900 feet, I would want to consider as a board having the above grade structure be the 900 feet, because basements aren't always good places to live.
On the flip side, sometimes the basement is like yeah,
It may depend on a grade, yeah, whether it's a walkout, so we might.
That's
have
not
to
gonna
look-
affect the neighborhood at all. Nobody's living in the basement.
okay, well, let's just get a sense of how we're
It
getting.
might be hard to have a separate entrance to a basement sometimes. but-
So, so your argument, you're saying, at least basement aside, the states, I think the state is going to, define that. That just my sense is that they'll tell us,
I think 900 feet is reasonable size for an ADU.
or half the state regulation currently is 900 square feet or half the gross square feet of the primary dwelling, whichever is less.
Whichever is
Which
smaller.
includes basement spacing calculation of the gross floor
So
area.
whatever the state, I'm just saying, do we want to be more lenient than the state? So you've said, accept the state's, whatever that's gonna be, or anybody want to argue for
I
being more
would tend
lenient?
to agree with Laura, 900 square feet, it's meant to be an accessory living unit.
Exactly.
And smaller than the primary and for rental, for in-laws, for
And I'm talking about protected use for right now.
The only thing I would say is if you're including the basement, you're really saying 450 square feet.
That's
which
why
is-
I took exception to the
which is too
basement as
small,
part of that
so-
calculation. I think the
No, I
I
basement
think it
should
should be
not
900 square feet of livable
above grade
space.
livable space. I agree.
Finished space. Okay, so basically the state definition, is anybody gonna argue for anything bigger than state? I don't think so.
Just something that Sarah said about, Sarah, you said that there've been people in front of the ZBA looking for what I guess would be an ADU that's as big as 2,000 square feet. Is that a common request?
Yeah. We're not seeing little things.
Right.
We're seeing, big things.
Yeah.
You've got the one on Central Street, 38 Central,
Mm,
that's large.
Right.
That's 2 stories above the garage, and that's gotta be 2,000, I think that might have been 2,400 square feet. It's a 3 or 4 bedroom.
Okay,
Um,
so that's not gonna be a protected use. So let's come back to whether
Right.
your point, which I share, that your suggestion that we cap ADUs at something.
Yeah.
So let's just stick with the protected use. The parking is in the statute. So we're not gonna change that. The parking is 1 space if you're more than a half a mile from the train and none if less than a half a mile from the train.
But Sarah, if you go above the 900 square feet under a special permit,
Absolutely.
you can
can-
change the parking. to that.
Absolutely. I'm talking about the protected use. Just the protected use ones, and then I'm gonna come to the others in a minute. So the parking is gonna be it's in the statute. We can't change that. The bulk and setbacks, I've heard Mary and Sarah Melish argue that we should have them the same as the primary dwelling. Whatever the regulations say, and the same as the primary dwelling,
And
and
the regulations do say
Say
that
that.
height has to be the same as a primary dwelling.
Yeah.
So you can't do the 1.5 stories.
for the protected use ones.
Correct.
And then the regulations are quite clear that the expansion of the protected use ADU. No, they're unclear, they're silent right now, I think, on expansion of a protected use ADU. So you want to make your 900 square foot ADU into a 2,000 square foot ADU. It seems to me that becomes a special permit. That seems to be pretty
Can I
clear.
just say something? Mary,
Yeah.
Mary brought up a good point. If I have a garage which is built way back when and it's 5 feet from the property line, well, within the setback like that, and now we're saying you cannot build that ADU on as a second floor on top of that garage
By right.
Right.
by right. They're pretty emphatic in here, like, don't do anything that counteracts what we're hoping to do here. So be it, I guess, if that's the case, if the garage is closed.
So one of the things that I keep thinking about is we want this, our life will be much easier and the building inspector's life if we are very clear about what's a protected use ADU and if we stick to the regulations. And we will pass this it will pass at town meeting. If we make things, not everybody is for ADUs. Some people are for them, some people are not for them. If we make them significantly more, less restrictive than the law allows us to, then we will, I think, have a hard time passing it at town meeting.
That's probably all.
Sort of a pragmatic approach.
I disagree with that. I think that if you get rid of all the existing ADU stuff, which you can't have that plus a new regulation, it's gonna be a mess. But if you include in the one bylaw the terms for the special permit, I think it will pass.
Okay.
As long as, particularly if you limit it to like 2,000 square feet.
I would go smaller than that.
Smaller accessory.
Well, whatever. I'm not gonna, I don't care. But I just think that if you have that special permit language in there, you're gonna cover the people who want something larger than 900 square feet. it's not gonna, by right is 900 square feet or less. And get rid of all the other garbage we have that is problematic.
Yes, it is.
Well, could you do it in the same bylaw if
Same.
And
article,
perhaps
yeah.
the special, would you want special permit ADUs even in like the two-family districts and stuff? I mean, or the
No.
Single
I
family.
would-
MBTA overlay districts?
No, I would limit I believe the law says that it's a single, a lot with a single residence on it.
Yeah.
One lot, one residence.
Yeah, and if you limit it to those lots, then you're not
Single
dealing with
dwelling.
any of the
Can you
multifamily.
tell me where you see that? Because I see the definition of single family that says, okay, it could be everywhere.
Is that in the
Or they're
regulation?
allowed in any district that
Right.
allows a single family.
Right.
But
That's what I'm
that
saying.
doesn't,
Because then I had a question and maybe somebody knows the answer.
So it said defines a single family residential dwelling as a structure on a lot containing not more than one dwelling unit.
But it doesn't,
Right.
what it doesn't say is that the protected use
I believe it
districts
does.
are in the, but nonetheless,
But so my-
that's draft regulations and that was a comment
Right.
throughout, so it will get clarified.
Right.
So my,
But if you do that, then you're protecting yourself of not having to do it in multifamily.
Yeah.
If they want to add an ADU in the MBTA zoning district, they could add the ADU to an existing single family,
Mhm.
but they couldn't do the multifamily plus an ADU if the
but then
regulations.
this leads, so maybe you know why they say this when they say unit caps and density, and it says protected use ADU shall not be counted in any density calculations. That leads me to believe that since we just passed the 15 units per acre, they're saying you can't count that as a 15.
Yeah,
No, it's saying in the calculation. We didn't
What
include
calculation?
ADUs in our calculation.
What calculation?
Calculation for the MBTA zoning.
okay, so, I want to keep moving on. So what I'm hearing is we want to adopt whatever the state's protected use ADU definition is, not go larger. Any disagreement with that? I'll come back to the, short-term rentals in a minute. Bulk and size setbacks, we would keep them the same as the primary dwelling. Unless the regulations say something else. If a protected use ADU is expanded, it would be a special permit. An additional, ADU where one special, protected use exists will be a special permit, because that's in the law. Well, that's in the draft regulations. If in draft regulations. Sarah has argued, and I would say that we should add some criteria for special permit ADUs. We don't have to necessarily know what those are right this second, but maybe Mark can suggest some. And then that we are assuming this is in single dwellings.
Lots
And it-
with a
One
single-
lot,
One lot with a
dwelling.
single dwelling, right? One lot with, okay,
With a
all right.
single family residential dwelling.
Okay, so then I'll come to are we in agreement that we should prohibit the use of protected use ADUs for short-term rentals? How about for all ADUs? Well, so it's two questions. Protected use ADUs for short-term rentals. Anybody disagree with that? This is for an article going to town meeting. But anybody disagree with that? Okay, how about non-protected new ADUs? Assuming that we have as Sarah suggests, a total ADU bylaw. Would we also restrict those on short-term? Chris has argued
no,
for,
I think they should be under a special permit. I think you should be able
well,
to.
they would be a special permit.
I wouldn't allow short-term rentals. under
Well,
a special permit.
So where else are you gonna put one? Except in an ADU.
Your house.
You're basically saying,
A whole residence.
Yeah, I don't see that this town wants
No.
people building ADUs in order to rent them out over the summer. They're looking for permanent housing.
What the intent of this is.
Right. So why would you even want to allow that by special permit? I don't wanna go there.
Okay, let's hear from other people. Anne, you had, so,
I would suggest that we make this as simple as possible and not be there. And my specific goal is to prohibit their use for rentals for less, 31 days or less. Rent it for the whole summer, fine. But, I think if you get into a lot of, we got a special permit this and we got a special permit that, you're going to have a harder time getting a clear language, that the town meeting can get.
Yeah, I agree. If it's gonna be controversial, let's not go there.
okay. All right, so
There's no
that,
reason not to go back to that at some point in the future.
Yeah.
But right now, unless we want to risk having ADUs built, used for short-term rentals, and therefore grandfathered.
Yeah.
Between now and when we get a comprehensive ADU bylaw.
Yep.
It's simple.
Sir, do we have a definition of a short-term rental right now? Is it that they're, what you just said, Ann, the 30?
We have a short-term rental bylaw, which is, as Sarah says, 6 days. And, the state has a definition, which is 31 days or less. And I suggest that we, in our copious free time, take a look at our current short-term rental bylaw and see how it can be applied.
which is in the general bylaw.
In the
We
general
don't have to do it.
bylaw.
But if you include the state definition of the short-term rental in the ADU bylaw.
Right.
Then you don't have to worry about the general bylaw at this point in time.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
So the other thing is, should we continue to allow ADUs in a garage or accessory structure for employees?
I don't see there's any reason to now.
Does anybody argue for trying to?
Explain
that.
that again, sir.
So
I
we-
hear all the words. I'm just.
That's fine. We currently have a special permit by the ZBA for the use of living quarters for, in a garage or accessory structure for employees.
Oh,
And this has been, there are lots of mother-in-laws who are suddenly employees. It's kind of an antiquated, artifact of our zoning that is unfortunately being, and you, yeah, I mean, does anybody gonna argue for trying to keep that? I don't think so. Oh, and
Actually, this gets into the question of things that are bigger than 900 square feet. And I suspect that many of these are.
But they would be grandfathered.
Okay, fine. If everything that's existing
Is
is
grandfathered.
grandfathered,
yeah, you're not gonna ask people to take out things that already exist.
You can't.
or, yeah, fine, okay.
Well, you
Okay.
could enforce that it's not a
You can
A rental.
enforce, you can enforce that it's not an employee, but this town has decided they don't want to do that.
But I'm saying going forward, that you could, if they start renting it, you could enforce it.
It's a hard thing to.
We haven't.
No, I know.
Well, hold it for me down.
Oh, for God's sake. The two.
Yeah. Trying to mute. Okay, and, Sarah has argued for, having one comprehensive ADU bylaw as opposed to leaving our existing ADU bylaw, which allows it if you have a, is it by special permit or is it just by right?
No,
No, special permit,
And only if you have a double lot.
if you have a
Double
double lot
lot.
and the house
And
existed
it's
before.
only in the principal structure, it's not an accessory structure. And it is limited, I believe, to 1/3 of the square footage of the existing residence.
And the house had to exist before 1984.
Right.
And is there an owner?
And there's a parking requirement.
Isn't there an occupation?
Yes, owner occupancy
Yeah.
required.
So if we take a comprehensive, simplified draft at this, then we would eliminate that as well.
Yes.
I want to come back to parking. Okay, go ahead, Ann.
Can I ask that you do those as two separate motions? add the simplified and remove the other one, 2 different votes.
I
And
think,
it's saying,
Oh, rather than amending what's there?
take out what's there.
yeah,
That's one motion.
absolutely.
Okay, got it.
Put in something new that's for protected ADUs, separate motion.
No.
So we don't need to decide that right now. What we want to do is get a draft bylaw that and then we'll figure out how to strategically, I hear what you're saying, how to strategically frame them as articles. I think there's a strategy, and I don't,
I think
We have to solve.
separating it, you're running a risk.
but nonetheless, what we want to do first is draft it and then we can figure out. I hear you. Parking, for larger ADUs, I think we would refer to our parking table, right? We
Yes.
wouldn't,
Sure.
okay, larger ADUs.
There,
Yes,
yes, for the record, I'll object to that.
okay,
Somebody has to.
nope. Laura. Okay, and we're saying special permit. Okay, and bulk and setback, we talked about those being with the primary residence with a thought about height. We can, on the larger ones, we can hold a placeholder for that, for this moment. It needs to be addressed and we can think about
Well,
that
this says that the height has to be the same as the.
for the protected use, but
Has to be the same
the
as-
larger
Oh,
ones.
okay, got it.
So we want to kind of.
Yep.
How about in larger, not protected use, would we want owner occupancy or age restricted or any other kinds of restrictions?
No. Not mine.
No, I don't think so either.
Gets complicated, but I'm just throwing it out there. Anybody,
So what would that look like, Sarah? What would that?
I mean, you could say you can have a 1,500 square foot ADU if it's for somebody over 55.
But it would also mean you could come in with a 900 square foot one and have it for over 55.
I don't think you can in the protected use ones.
So some towns have ADU bylaws that are
Yeah.
62 plus or family member.
Really hard to enforce.
Yeah,
No,
people
yeah,
get,
yeah,
age
and
and
then
they die
people
and they
change.
get born and.
Right,
That's
right. That, yeah, I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have, enough to have Mark start drafting something. Any other thoughts that people want to add for, now, some of these are gonna evolve as the regulations, from the state evolve.
I guess we're not gonna talk about what that cap is tonight, but we should talk about it because just on the surface of it, 2,000 square feet sounds like another house to me.
Right,
Sounds like a house in the village. So I would suggest we go smaller, well, 50
Okay.
year, something that the board discusses and
so,
can recommend.
yep.
Are we suggesting that that would become protected at this newer
No, I
No,
think
it
this
would
is
not
the
be
maximum
special
size of
permit.
an
maximum size
ADU.
of an ADU, but not a protected?
In a, so an ADU in a single lot, single family. You know. So,
Do we know when the guidelines are coming out?
the date on the PowerPoint is February 2nd.
But we don't know
But we
where
don't
that
know.
came from.
We don't know where that came from and, one of
They're
my.
coming out the date that it's effective?
Mhm.
I know,
Yeah.
here we go, I know.
And I did make a comment that, they need to do that because when we have spring town meetings, we had to post for public hearing on the end of February. So that was one of my comments. So,
Well, and the way the law is written,
yeah,
on
I know.
February 2nd, somebody can apply for a building permit and there's not a darn thing we can do about it.
Oh, exactly, we're totally.
Exactly. So, anyway, okay, so I think we have, enough there to move ahead. Unless, we will have another, this is, hopefully that's helpful. I want to do the same thing, for the idea of the, commercial in, downtown. So, Mark, you wanna just refresh us, why we're thinking about this, just to remind people?
Well, in case someone wanted to tear down an existing commercial building and wanted to just put up 2 residential units on the property, which you can do by right. The idea would be to at least have this discussion about requiring first floor commercial to maintain and like the core area downtown, maintain your commercial kind of area, core area. So that you don't begin to have more kind of pockets of non-resident, non-commercial use. And maintain kind of your the continuity of the commercial district.
Could you give a kind of a where that begins and where ends geographically?
Yeah, so geographically, you have a commercial core right outside of town hall, right? A small little area of commercial from basically where the river is, or Pine Street, going up to, well, the commercial
From Elm
zone
Street,
extends
yeah.
for all the way up, but the idea would to bring it at least up to where the gas station is, at least initially around to Beach Street. So that area you would want to, so you have kind of a commercial core here, and you have a commercial core at the beginning of Beach Street, right? That kind of wraps around, and so you already have a bit of a gap between the two. So you don't want to lose additional commercial properties and widen that gap. What you want to do is narrow it. And so, for example, 7 Central Street is, even though they're proposing to add residential units, 3 residential units, they're going to keep the commercial space along the streetscape for commercial uses. There's some discussion about the building on the corner of the green building on the corner of School and Central to reopen or try and lease out the first floor for commercial space. The rest of the building's been renovated or in the process for residential, continue that residential use. But so that's the type of thing you'd like to see continuing along. So for example, there's the Sovereign Bank. I don't ever appear busy to me, but at some point that might close, as lots of banks have. And ideally that could be reused for commercial property or knocked down, still maintain some commercial, but entertain some residential there as well. Because that's what's being proposed for the cargo building. And so if you lose that frontage, you're widening the gap between the 2 commercial areas rather than narrowing the gap. So.
And would commercial be a non-town entity? Is it a business? Are we clarifying that, or is it just commercial
Oh, because
include?
we have things like the library and museum, well, museum's not town, but I mean, again, that's all part of the discussion. I think today is just kind of to understand that and then discuss what some of the parameters could be, so that if we do want to move forward with it, if we have time, at least I have some kind of guidance to work from here. So, that's a suggestion to not have additional municipal uses in this core area. That's certainly something that we can add to.
So I have a little bit of a problem with this because it's sort of market driven, isn't it? You require everybody to keep a commercial space on the first floor. We just have a bunch of vacant commercial spaces. And
So-
that scares me, but I think there's a remedy for it, which is to, at the same time, encourage residential uses above them. So they go together. And I think the only way we protect the downtown is by having more people living here, not fewer. So, I think if some kind of requiring a special permit, if you're gonna take away commercial space, but then at the same time encouraging residential development above commercial space, something like that might work.
It's already a change of use, which I believe has come before the ZBA. We get change of uses. For instance, 48 Central went from mixed use to residential, and that had to come before us. So if you get rid of commercial, cargo unlimited, if they're gonna switch to housing, they'd have to come before ZBA.
And will they get a special permit or a variance?
We can't issue variances for use, so the only change of use we can do is a use that's allowed in the district.
Well, residential use is allowed in the district,
Correct. So it would be a special permit to change, for change of use,
okay?
but, I personally don't feel that that type of change can occur without an enormous amount of communication like they did for the MBTA zoning. I mean, it's a can of worms. Look at all the empty places that are there today. The empty commercial spaces.
Where is that, Sarah? Where is the empty? We
Where's
had a-
what?
We had a very vigorous conversation about this in the downtown improvement meeting too. It went on for like an hour and a half going on and talked about exactly.
About cargo?
Where cargo was part of it, but they also talked about the empty commercial spaces currently.
Well, you got Helen's Bottle Shop that's gone. You got the old crafts place that's gone. You got Jamie's Roast Beef that's gone,
In cargo.
and cargo that's gone. So that's a lot of. And Zach's. That's a lot of commercial spaces that have not been used for commercial uses, for a while. The crafts has been for rent for, I'd say, close to 6 months.
What's crafts?
What?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah,
And
it's the bike.
Next
yeah.
to the fire.
Well, and then also you have, the old North Coast on both sides of the street
Yep.
is now not retail, it's commercial, realtors on one, and I don't know what it is on the other.
Well, and you used to have the dentist's office in the Zager's house,
Yeah.
and there's nothing commercial left there anymore.
So the question sort of you're asking is, if you zone it, will they come? But if they don't come, is it worse and less vital than
Then a residential
residential?
use? Yeah. That's the
So,
question.
Laura,
There are lots of examples out there of mixed-use districts where the ground floor use is required to be commercial. And I agree that if that is also encouraging second floor residential uses, it's gonna add the customers to the retail base,
People.
right?
Yeah,
So cargo apparently used to have a second floor, and some of those other real estate offices had a second floor. They've been in one story for many decades, but if they go back to being two-story plus a commercial requirement on the first floor, I think that helps to revitalize the town, and towns do go through cycles, and so we are in kind of a bust at the moment, but if we make it so it's not possible to have retail back there, then we're not allowing for that flexibility of future uses to come in, I think, as the town continues to.
yeah, the other thing is if you have a mixed use, then you have some different revenue streams.
Yeah.
You know,
The other thing is, you don't have to require 100% of the first floor. So for example, the 7 Central Street, only the front portion, and we can draft it a certain way, of the first floor is commercial, and then the rear portion, according to plans, would be for 2 townhouses in the back, but on the first floor of that building. So, I mean, again, we can craft it that way. For example, the cargo building is a fairly deep building. And so it doesn't need to be that deep to maintain the commercial space. So the rear portion could be utilized for the first floor of residential units, so for parking for residential units above. So there is, ways of crafting it to allow mixed use, maintain commercial, but so that you maintain the streetscape, but not overly burdened with commercial numbers, and that can change. I mean, 2 years from now, there may be a shortage of commercial properties. It's kind of hard to predict the future. So particularly in towns, small towns that have downtown areas that can have little shops that cater to specific things, as opposed to trying to compete with, the big retail chains and stuff.
I guess
we-
what, oh, go ahead.
Could we go back to talking about the geographical parameters? For example, where on Beach Street would we want to start? Where between Singing Beach and downtown, where would we want our commercial district to start?
Tappan Street, for example.
Cap and Dusty's.
Yeah, I mean, what would the thought be?
Well, I think that's something that we would kind of look over, print out some maps of the downtown and kind of look over it. I mean, you could argue that maybe you should start on this side of Beach Street at the railroad tracks and at the other side of Beach Street at the gas station. Then bring it up Central, Beach Street to Central, up to the
Pine Street.
isn't
The seaside one.
the Bluebird on the other side of,
Right,
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the Harbor Point property.
I don't think you
personally-
would include Harbor Point in this.
Why not?
Why not? Because, people are concerned about preserving drugstore and Dunkin' Donuts and the physical therapy place and,
So you think by
That's sort of
allowing them
those
to
are all
add
occupied,
on
yeah.
commercial above, a retail above would allow them to maintain the commercial below?
Residential above.
I mean, residential above would allow them to maintain the commercial below.
Yeah, I would absolutely include that.
And I'd go up Summer Street,
Summer,
up to, maybe up to C Street.
So that, I
There's the
mean,
coffee shop anyways, right? Yeah.
that's so that's creating a mixed use district that we don't currently have,
Right.
correct?
right,
So it is a big deal. I obviously see the merits of it. I'm just questioning, I heard over and over again for past 8+ years is that we don't want to dictate what people can do with their property. And so this would be clear indication of doing that. I guess I would like to do a lot of it resident feedback on this one.
I mean, I had originally envisioned that we would try and get a grant to do a much bigger planning project. And then as part of that would be to look at the downtown core zoning project, as well as a streetscape renewals or have a team come in with a landscape architect and an engineer and planners, really put together a master plan for the downtown core and zoning to match. The cargo building kind of threw a little bit of a wrench into that timing, because that's kind of a key piece you don't want to lose. So that's why we're having this discussion. The other question would be, could they do some sort of limited mixed use with a special permit over there to have residential, but the thing is, they'd still be restricted to 2 residential units under the current zoning.
3,
3,
general district 3.
but if it's new building, new construction,
Special permit.
It depends on if they increase gross square footage or not. Yeah, if there's new building.
yeah, I mean, it would have to be a new building, the current condition.
I just personally feel you're short-sighted trying to do planning around one specific sale of a building in Manchester.
That's why I'm asking that question, is that if it could be done under a special permit, it'd be better to do the full planning exercise before you come to the zoning. But
Yeah, if this is part of a way bigger project, we can't break off just the chunk of
Mhm.
this zoning piece and get that passed and then build around that. Like, we need the whole
Yeah.
picture.
Well, except that I'll say that this is an outgrowth of the task force work. It was identified very early on as I think we sort of said, oh, this is an opportunity to, use, before we realized that that residential above commercial wouldn't count in our numbers. At least that's my recollection, is that we said, oh, this is an opportunity, we have a vulnerability that, was identified in that conversation, and that until we realized it didn't count, was like, oh, this is a great chance to sort of enshrine a commercial along the sidewalkscape and residential above. So I don't think it's completely out of the blue. I agree that that it's a fast track.
We had 18 months of communication on the MBTA zoning, and you would have like 1 month on this if you do it for April. I don't see it would pass.
I'm just saying, if
It's
it's
too much
part of
trouble
a
to
bigger
count at once.
project, we need the big project before we vote in one piece of it. Somebody has their hand up on.
Yeah, we're gonna take comment and later. Laura.
What does the master plan say about the commercial district and the goal for
Mixed use,
mixed use?
important to save the retail
Mhm.
and commercial uses.
I don't think it
That doesn't-
clarifies defining, as quote the definition mixed use, but it's to keep the residential and commercial, but not a clear mixed use district.
Sarah, can I
Yeah,
just have a
absolutely.
comment to Mark? I know this has been
Yeah,
bantered
Yeah,
around
we're.
a lot of times. Does it need a zoning change for them to put retail, some level of commercial and residential above?
it would be a special permit,
Something
but it
big?
would be limited to 3 residential. But they could still have the commercial, because that's a permitted use as well.
Right, mixed use is a permitted.
But they
permitted
could
use,
do
they
that
don't
right
want
now
it.
without going to a zoning change.
Right, the issue is they don't want, that's not what they want.
I-
Just
That's another
residential,
story.
yeah.
Yeah, it's allowed today.
Yeah, didn't, the unit a couple doors down become a house? That was a,
The gray house.
yeah.
Right.
But it's got a business in the first
Yeah.
floor.
Jeweler,
Antiques.
Gladstone.
No.
No,
Grace-
Greystone.
Grace-
He was a lawyer for a while.
Antiques.
Before that, it was a gift shop.
Is it ever open?
It was open during the holiday stroll. That's when I went in.
You're selling the furniture.
Personally, I think it's worth us at least taking another look at it. We've sort of talked about, I think I'm hearing that the goal is a good goal. The goal to maintain the streetscape, for commercial uses along that street with mixed use residential above. So I would say personally, I'd like to see us look at put something together that has various maybe not a draft per se, but here are the parameters. Here's what it would look like, here's where it would, and maybe we don't extend it as far as we limit the scope to start.
Well, look, it may not be ready for springtime meeting, but if we don't start now.
If
we're
we
never
don't start
gonna-
now, right,
we're never
and
gonna
then,
get done.
right, otherwise we're gonna be sitting here in September
Saying
saying
the
the
same
exact
thing.
same
Yeah,
conversation.
Exactly.
So, if people are amenable, I'd like to ask Mark to start thinking about drafting here are the elements of it, and then at least what would it look like, and then we can begin to understand whether it makes sense. Anne,
I'm concerned that we're doing zoning to deal with one specific development. I think that's not a good approach.
Well, I don't think we can't do anything about what's happening with cargo anyway.
But I think that Mark was talking about a bigger plan.
Mark is talking about a bigger
Yeah,
plan,
so
but.
that doesn't mean we can't start now.
Is it possible to ask a question while we're on the topic? Because what typically ends up happening is at the end, I'm
Yeah.
told that we've already discussed that.
We are gonna take,
Time.
yeah, we're trying to
Well,
have a
we're
working
letting-
session here.
Non-members in,
Yeah, and
in
with,
the
by the way,
rooms.
they're the,
Invited.
yeah, we're in.
well, but I'm just saying,
I'm-
you're a resident just like every other resident, and so I think that's unfortunate look. for
I'm
the
happy to
planning
have,
board.
the, I think we should start to think about this, even if it's, I kind of feel like if we, the flip side of what you're saying, Anne and Sarah, is cargo changes to residential, the bank changes to residential, Harbor Point changes to residential in the next year. I mean, they think things change hands, there's, pressure, there's incentives, residential. And people are saying, where the heck was the planning board on this issue? I think that you can argue it both ways, and I don't think it was,
My only argument is you have quite a lot on your plate.
I know.
And I think there are, since it's too late to stop the one that's going on now. Fine, set up whatever you want, but don't try and push something through for it.
It's not gonna pass, it would fail without the communication. I mean, people in town do not want to be told what to do with their buildings.
So that's fine, let's plan for next fall or next spring. We gotta start.
But he's talking about a
You
bigger,
keep saying it's gonna take 18 months. If we start now,
but
you
he's
might never,
talking about a bigger plan.
well, that's fine. So it takes
Hiring
18 months.
consultants to work on it.
Well, let's continue to think about it. I think there's agreement that this is an important issue. So we'll think about, I think it's hard to prejudge what will pass and what won't pass. I think we've learned that. And let's continue to think about continue to talk about whether this is something that we can do perhaps piecemeal, or whether and then a larger plan, or a larger plan first and then the pieces come together.
I mean, we definitely did hear during our communication process on MBTA zoning that people are worried about all the businesses turning over into residences. They don't want that. We did hear that. I heard that anyway. Particularly like Harbor Point, and Crosby's, and a hardware store and restaurants. Those were all singled out. So I think there is some sentiment out there to do something.
Okay, the next topic that I wanted to,
Public comment?
I'd like to try to take the comments at the end so we can get through these 3 issues, and then we can pause and take some comments on.
We just have, sorry, but there's one hand up, and Sarah's tried a couple times. I think it'd be a perfect time to hear from another resident. Sorry. Just give her a chance to say, she's had her hand up for 2 topics so far. Is that?
Let's just get through the next topic, and then I'll pause and we can
Thank
take
you.
comments. We'd like to, I want to get through this next topic because we have a lot we're trying to do. The next topic that I want to talk about is the associate members. We talked about this 2 years ago or a year ago. The state law allows us to have a process to assign associate members to the planning board who can fill in for special permit and site plan and potentially for site plan review. I guess the statute is silent, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, the statute is silent on site plan review, but Mark's experience is that associate members, if it's in the bylaw, can weigh in on site plan review. And given our experience with self-signaling, and they were quite accommodating to our election cycle and Ron's passing, and we're kind of willing to, start over. Which they did not need to do. They were willing to work with us on that. But, and given that there's, potentially members that turn over every year. And, when you have a big site, a special permit, you can really, be at risk for the applicant's fairness and also for the town's ability to create regulations. So I'd like to see us draft a very simple amendment to, I think it'll be section 12, that allows us to have, I think the statute says how many members, I think it's 2 for a 7-member board. For a term of, 3 years or 2 years or whatever we want, appointed by the planning board.
And they come in as needed.
And then you call them in as needed only for special permits and site plan reviews. They sort of sit like alternates on a jury.
Mhm.
And then if somebody is, I think that's how it works.
Yeah, and in general, my experience, every town that I've had with alternates is they attend all the board meetings, they participate as if they were a regular board member, but if, let's say all of a sudden Laura needs to miss 2 meetings and can't vote, because that person has been at all the hearings, whether it's site plan review or special permit, that person now can fill in. And that's why it's important that they be considered essentially part of the board with the exception of voting.
Right, but so they're part of the special permit and site plan review.
Yes, yeah. And generally, even if you're discussing zoning or, planning board regulations, because they're, been part of it, that you generally, they're part of the discussion as well.
So there's, if I can just give a
They
little
just
background
don't
here.
vote. It just,
The reason this is important is because when someone files for a special permit, the clock starts ticking. And if for some reason the planning board doesn't have enough voting members to grant the special permit or deny the special permit, it's constructively granted if no vote is taken. And that's why these associate members are important. So that the planning board always has a voting majority to.
And you need a super majority, a 7-member board needs
Needs
5
5
affirmative
votes.
votes. Or negative votes, whatever it is. Or no, that's not true. It needs 5 affirmative votes to grant the permit. So it is a special, so it's also sort of protection for applicants that, that somebody can't.
But more importantly,
Yeah.
if say 3 members had a conflict of interest and couldn't vote on a
Right.
special permit, it would be constructively granted.
So, this came up before and can be controversial and we decided not to do it. I've been on the planning board again 8+ years and it has never been an issue. The cell signaling one was probably the first, and I believe cell signaling had to reboot their special permit anyway, so it kind of worked out. My opinion is now getting 9 people in this room, all discussing, asking questions, is perhaps something that would not be enjoyable. And I'd like to understand the need more. We can throw out all sorts of, ooh, what if this happens and what if that happens? But they don't, these things don't happen. I also get a little concerned when we say we're going to appoint people, and that process becomes, again, who we would appoint would be a majority of who, vote to who we appoint. And so we always go down the same channel of a certain type of person to be on these boards. So I have to voice a fear that I think this is trying to ensure certain votes happen in a way that the board wants them to happen. So I personally, as a planning board member, do not currently think it's a good idea. Like I've said, I've seen the process for a long time and it doesn't seem as a need. It seems a more complicating factor and perhaps putting a bit of a thumb on the voting process.
I'll add that the ZBA has 2 associate members,
I know,
and we use them all the time. And if you're gonna be doing site plan reviews on the MBTA zoning, you're gonna be having a lot more come before you. And the ZBA has strict regulations as to the law tells us when we have to hold our public hearing. And we have people who are out of town on business.
so,
And for the 40B, we had all members attend every single session in case we ran into a problem at the end with the vote.
I would really like to keep these
So-
as planning board discussions. The ZBA only does special permits. We do a lot more than special permits. We don't do all that many special permits. So again, I stand by what I said.
Well, associate members by the statute is are for special permit. And Mark's experience is that you can also extend that to site plan review. So I'm not sure that they are expected to weigh in on zoning changes that will, and that's your experience, but
Yeah,
their
But you don't
primary
have
purpose
to,
is
I
to
mean-
weigh in on special permits and if we were to draft it such for site plan review and self-signaling absolutely we needed them to either work with us or we were in trouble.
So I have not been on the planning board for 8 years, not just barely 2 years. But during cell signaling and the special permits we were dealing with last summer regarding the harbor, I mean, many of us, if we had alternates, I mean, you were trying to do a Zoom from an airport. I was doing a Zoom the night after my daughter got married, when the rest of my family was out. But I would have loved to have skipped that. I mean, and there were other examples of that. And with Ron's passing, I mean, as Sarah said, we were lucky. I feel like it's a little bit irresponsible that we don't have a backstop.
And that's fair, but we are the elected people. These people are not elected and we don't use them as, I'd like to go on a trip, so I want to, not do my responsibilities that people elected me for. So,
Well, that wasn't the point I was trying to make.
well, but so we don't elect, I mean, the residents don't elect these associates and I can see the merit of them for sure. I just don't think, my personal opinion is it doesn't seem like a good fit for the planning board.
Do we have a consensus about whether we want to have, it's a fairly simple change to section 12. Mary has voiced her objection. I'm
I'd
gonna.
say yes. I might say, Mary, I'm a perfect example of that. I wasn't elected. And I came at a time when Sarah called me and asked me would I went through the whole process, and I actually think it probably facilitated the CSD permitting and the MBTA stuff because of my experience and
appointed.
background. So I think it does have value. I am one of those people that would be here, just listening and understanding and eventually being able to fill in.
So I do have a question about, and just to pick up on something Mary was saying about the appointment of it. How Mark, do you have a sense of how that's done in other communities? Is it a call for interest? How is it? Do we solicit
well,
people? How does it work?
So typically, for example, with our design review board that we have, they are advertising it like they do for any select board appointed board, town boards. They're publicizing it on the website, the newsletter.
I saw it on social media.
Yeah, social media, and then people submit their applications, a letter of interest. And then, board sits down and interviews them, so. This draft says 3-year terms appointed by the planning board. I mean, I believe we could make it different, joint appointments, annual appointments, because they are alternates as opposed to elected. So those are things that we can discuss as options, but I think having the ability to have alternates, because you just don't know what's going to happen with people, with events and, and other, trips and vacations. So it's,
it also may be a good way to get people acquainted with what the board is doing. Someone who's not very interested, but wants to sit in and see what's going on, it'd be a great experience.
Right, so it was, oh.
I
Laura,
was just gonna suggest instead of a 3-year term, perhaps we consider a 1-year term with the possibility for renewal up to 3. I think if someone wants to serve as an associate member, it might also have more luck
yeah.
getting people to come in for 1 year at a time.
3 years.
It's a long time if you can't vote.
True. Yeah,
Kind of
good
something
point. I mean,
that-
I just put that in there.
Yeah.
That's what we had put in there, we had discussed previously.
and then it
Um,
gives them experience of attending all these meetings.
Yeah.
And deciding when someone chooses not to run again, or that they can then, run for that opening.
Okay, I know Mary has spoken eloquently against this, but anybody else want to speak? Can we ask Mark to put together a draft that we can then review?
Sure.
Any other objections?
No, I'd love to see a draft, but I also heard two different things. Mark, I think you were saying that these associate members would participate in all conversations, and Sarah, you were saying that they'd be restricted to,
They vote only on special permits.
but they would be involved in conversations for
I think we could-
everything.
We can
Yeah, I
talk
think
about
that's up to the chairperson. Obviously,
Yeah.
during public hearings, you would want them involved, because in case they do have to vote, that they can participate and ask questions. Most towns still allow them to participate in any discussion that you might have, like the downtown or zoning changes, just because, again, you want their input. It's another person who's kind of getting trained up on what boards do. So, so.
Okay, great. Well, we'll look for a draft on that. Before we jump to the rest of the potential things on potential things for spring or future town meetings, Sarah, go ahead. Sarah Pierce.
Oh, hi, thank you. Do you need my address or?
Sure.
9 Friend Street. Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna have to jump around on a few topics here, but for the commercial space, I've heard from a lot of people that the commercial rental space in Manchester, the rents are way too expensive, and that's why we're losing businesses left and right. I'm also wondering how adding residential above that would help those businesses stay there, as someone had mentioned on the board. You're not really adding that many people above that, unless, did you mention 2 stories above? Or I know you don't have that solidified yet, but just a comment on the commercial space and its renting. In addition, we just passed zoning for 559 units. Whether all of those get built or not, we have not even gone into those permits or buildings being constructed in this meeting. And now we've also talked about ADUs being added, ranging from 900 to 2,000 square feet. And there just seems to be a general obsession with making Manchester bigger. More buildings, more traffic, more parking. Where are all these cars going to park for these units above the existing commercial? There's no parking now. With on-street parking, cars cannot pass each other on the roads. I've almost been hit twice head-on on School Street when there's cars parked and 2 cars are trying to pass each other. I just think we have an awful lot on our plate for such a small town, between the MBTA zoning, which, keep in mind, was initially a mandate to solve a housing crisis, not just to increase the scale and size of small towns, which most units will not be affordable. So that was what that was about, but we're getting way off track. On a side note, I would just like to say that I don't feel the way that these meetings are run are very resident friendly. And it's really uncomfortable for the public when other board members mistreat other board members. And I'm noticing that people who watch the reruns of these meetings notice that. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention, not in any disrespectful way, but just as a matter of information. That's
Okay.
my comments and somewhat questions.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Yes, yes, Lorraine Iavani, 28 Pine Street.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Creighton. A couple of comments. Let me address first the commercial aspect. I think the intent is very good that we look to preserve commercial. And the reason is that in the village area, most of us who live here find the walkability factor, very important, particularly with regard to the number of seniors that live in the actual village area. So it's nice to have the luxury of being able to walk in a community and have the services here. But basically, when you talk about the fact that we're becoming a dead downtown in many respects. If you look at a number of other towns, like, for example, if you look at Beverly, Rantoul, if you look at Gloucester, Main Street, or even Hamilton, they're pretty vibrant. So you have to ask, what's the root cause? And I think someone alluded to the fact that perhaps rents are too high, the economy, maybe it's the niche of what the business is all about. What the Downtown Improvement Committee should be doing is doing surveys of what the town folk really want to see downtown. And then they should be working with an ad hoc group that will go out and try to secure businesses with incentives. We've talked about this, I don't know how many times for the last several years. So really, you really need to look at the root cause here on why we're losing businesses, because right now it's really bleak downtown. So that's one comment that I have. Another is with regard to the ADUs, there's no question that we need them, and that we should, comply with at least the minimum for the state. As far as anything else, I think we're on the right track in terms of a 2,000 square foot ADU is a house. So whatever it takes with special permitting to ensure that our neighbors, all of the neighbors, are not encroached upon. So whatever it takes with special permitting. So I think you're on the right track with ADUs. With regard to the MBTA, I don't know if KBR actually did an advisory for our select board. However, it's clear to me that we need to secure a little bit more data before we determine, regardless of whether or not the AG approves these particular regulations, that we should secure some kind of stay or moratorium. I really believe that we should ask KP Law to clarify with the EOHLC whether or not they would indeed agree to staying any type of implementation. Because if the AG were next week to approve, what I heard was these stand alone, and so what? We'll just go ahead and apply them to the current situation. I really feel we need to secure through an adequate process, which includes the posting, a possible hearing, commentary by all those people interested, and then consideration. You yourselves just mentioned that you have some concerns that you would like clarified. I don't understand why we cannot make a request whether it's approved or not, at least make the request from our KP Law to the state and ask them for a stay or moratorium, or whatever you want to call it, with regard to letting the EOHLC comply with their portion of the law. It is an act. It is an act of administrative procedure, and they have violated that. So quite frankly, I don't see what the big deal is with that. I really, truly don't. So those are the 3 comments that I have for this evening. I do appreciate everything that all of you do. You are volunteers, elected officials, and whatnot, and it's hard work. But by the same token, you have a lot on your plate. And I really think the due diligence portion needs to be there. I don't know how many times I sound like a broken record, but I'm going to say it. We need to do our due diligence. So thank you very much. And actually, that's all I have to contribute for this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Sarah, do you have another comment, or is your hand just up from before?
Oh, sorry, no, I'll take that down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I make a comment on some of their comments? Just that I had raised it years ago to the town administrator, and I think through the planning board, but for the town really to look to having an economic development plan. Right on our planning board website, one of our roles is to strengthen the local economy. And perhaps this, looking at mixed use is a step towards that. But I would, with all these grants and everything else, why have we not engaged in an open economic development plan that would benefit the town? So I'd like to throw that out there, that is discussed. I mean, again, that's a part of what the planning board is supposed to do.
Okay, thank you. Close short, the other issues that we had talked about bringing to town meeting or in the near, whether it's spring or fall, the floodplain bylaw. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, that the state still hasn't issued the,
No, since,
correct me.
yes, so in the last few weeks, they did issue one portion of what they were supposed to do, which is the draft regulations. So that we can work on. However, they still haven't released the maps. So the updated map are supposed to be released by, I remember correctly, the end of this month or early February, they're supposed to be released. So hopefully by, so I should be able to send around the draft of the,
Is it a model bylaw or is it draft regulations?
Yeah, I think it's a model bylaw. So, that we kind of have to adopt, so. But I will get that.
If you can give us a summary at the next meeting, that would be
Yeah,
helpful.
the next meeting, hopefully I'll even have a draft for you.
So Mark, is that different than the 2020 model bylaw?
Yes,
Okay, so it's gonna be like 2025?
yeah, it's 2020, the date on it is 2024, but we need to adopt it, and so they just completed the last round of changes to make it compliant. So.
Some of these things, it's like realistically, you're gonna do all these things.
Yes.
Just sort of, you have to fund the town too. I mean, it's just sort of a, I mean, the other thing, I guess, sort of as you talk is maybe, if you think about commercial on first floor and floodplain, just maybe, there's a need, there would be a June town meeting instead of waiting all the way to November. That we could think about that as a, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. Okay, the zoning introduction needs, that's just a procedural thing. I think we have that drafted.
So the zoning introduction is already in, you have a 2-page introduction to the zoning, which is a little bit, includes a lot, and the problem is it also includes things that are no longer the case, such as requiring 2/3 vote by town meeting for zoning change. Well, there's been a law adopted since that you only need 50%. So that section is in contrary to zoning. And a lot of the introduction just reiterates various state laws. So rather than reiterate those, I mean, they really should be removed because, as you saw, the state laws change. So you really don't need all that language. It's just redundant and can cause a problem.
So that's fairly procedural, right? We could just
Yes,
ask KP Law to, right? Didn't we have a new one, or was it just?
No. We
We
just,
did for the, it was in the packet for the MBTA task force, but we were worried that by including it in the zoning amendments would trigger.
so
the-
we had just an amendment just to change that
That
one
one, yes,
section,
okay.
but not to really kind of go through that and go and.
Is that really important right now? for
No,
the-
it's
Maybe we
not
can-
necessarily important. Maybe what would be important is to remove the section right now that is contrary to the current state law.
I have a comment on the zoning bylaws and the recodification. There were pieces taken out asking us to rely on the state laws, which means every time a variance comes before the ZBA, I have to go to the state code to find out what the rules are. And for a volunteer board, that's not acceptable, and that we need to have the state stuff in these bylaws. Instead of having the ZBA having to go multiple different places.
Does it reference in the bylaws, the new bylaw, or just no? Does it reference the
No,
law?
it has absolutely nothing regarding, it just says we have the right to grant variances.
But it
And
says,
so then we have to go to the state to find out what the rules are for granting a variance.
but interestingly, in the introduction, it says, rights acquired under a variance shall lapse if they are not exercised within 1 year.
Right,
So we don't have that anywhere else in the bylaw except for in the introduction?
right. So
Is that
it's-
a state
the-
law?
The variance, yeah, the variance piece was taken out. The section on variance under administration was taken out. And I don't know what else was taken out, but it's all I'm saying is, I know Mark doesn't like to have the state stuff in our bylaws. But a resident comes and asks you a question, and you
Right.
have to send them to the state
I know.
bylaw. It's not customer friendly and it's not board friendly.
I wonder if there could be an appendix that lists the current state laws that are referred to in the bylaws. You just go to that. Because the state laws do change and
That's okay.
well, it's okay, except they're wrong, but then you're quoting a wrong piece of bylaw when you're studying your rules.
It
They
is,
should be amended.
So I
We have
think there's been, and as we're going through this list now, there's a fair amount that is still needs redoing, changing, whatever for recodification. I think as a board, we do need to kind of step back and go through this with Sarah. Things that were taken out that shouldn't have been taken out, things that are in the wrong place, or et cetera. It's not user friendly. I always get the terms mixed up, but the like table of contents and the appendix
the index, yeah.
index, thank you, don't exactly. So there's a lot to change in this, and let alone the typos and everything else. So as we keep piling onto something that is
The wildebeest.
not great, we're making things worse. And so I don't know why we wouldn't just step back for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, but take a step back and right some of the wrongs that we know are there. It's messy.
Go ahead, Laura.
If those things can be documented and cataloged, is it possible that we could ask Mark to have staff, kind of take a pass at it. I just worry about this as
Still
being a
doing it
good use of the
piecemeal,
board's
right.
time to get into, if it's mostly non-substantive, it has consequences certainly. And it needs to be organized and, whatever grammatical things that have substantive consequences addressed, but it doesn't seem like maybe, number one, it's not a good use of our time. Number two, we're not gonna make it more efficient by 7 of us talking about it at that level of detail, maybe.
Right, so
Asking.
there are technical
Yeah.
things that you do know of. And
Well,
but if there are technical things that would be non-overly controversial, that would take a lot of time. And you can send me the old version and why this is confusing or wrong, and it wasn't meant to be, for example, like D2 we'll discuss next. And whether we should fix it or just take it out completely could be a short discussion. And probably would be a very short warrant article. So
Yeah.
if you do know of stuff, send it to me, and at least we can put it on a list, and if it's something short, we can put it on for the spring, and if it's something that all of a sudden becomes a big, long discussion, it'll be, we'll fix it in the fall, perhaps, so. Because we do have a limited time.
Yeah, and
Right
if
now
you have
for
specific
the
things,
spring
then we
town.
need to bring them forward. I have a couple things. But unfortunately, the board did try to hire a consultant, and we all know how that, process went. And one of the challenges we, I think, learned is that the consultant felt that we could, I think, delete the zoning bylaw and insert the new one.
well,
But so in its comprehensive, and then there were errors in what was presented to us. I think we can all agree that there were some shortcomings in that material, some of which we adopted with, we hired a consultant to do it. So, we, not for lack of trying, because I think a lot of time has been spent to try to remedy things. So if there are important things that are still, and then at some point, I think when the sting is still off, we're gonna have to do the rewrite that should be done to fix, but until then, I think it's kind of, certainly for spring, we're not gonna handle it.
Great.
So if you have, we should keep our list and,
But send them to me.
right, so the next one that is on the list is the zoning D2 class clarification. So Mark was like, where did this come from? So I sent him I found the old zoning in the Mark Bobrowski folder. And D2 was 100 feet back from the road on the heater. On the inside or the outside,
Both
both
sides.
sides.
no, on the
No,
outside, on the
outside,
street.
on the, yeah, the
Well,
street,
it's-
yeah, so,
Pool Street's only on one side,
right,
yeah.
yeah, so. Then we just put it on a map. And deleted the language. So now, and I don't think that has moved fully to the assessor, so there's a lot of confusion.
D2 was created in the 80s
91, I think.
or 90.
Okay, but nonetheless,
I think you need to find what was voted on at town meeting.
I think I have that. I have
Yeah.
like the copies from the papers from town hall.
well, I assume it's the language that was in the zoning, the old zoning. Had, the old zoning got there somehow.
I'm talking about the whole purpose behind
Oh,
it.
purpose behind it. Okay,
I know
so,
the purpose.
so I think, Sarah, you have made the case that we should just merge D1 and D2 and call it the D.
No,
No.
my recommendation is to eliminate D2 based on the theory that we've just passed the MBTA zoning, which is creating multifamily districts.
Mhm.
And the D2 is very poorly crafted. It has not been enforced properly over the years. And that if you wanna rezone the areas, don't just try to take 100 feet from the street and have a different zoning. And so my recommendation is to eliminate everything to do with D2 at this point in time.
Well, so you
What
would,
does eliminate mean?
yeah, so you would move
It'll
D1 and
become a-
D2 would become a D district.
They'll become,
Hmm.
Eliminate D2.
They become a B or an A or whatever it was?
There already are. They already have an underlying
They
zoning
don't
district.
have-
Yes, they do.
Well, so that's the thing,
Pine
is the
Street is
language.
all District A. And D2 is only the first 100 feet between the street.
But that's why we did the amendment for the MBTA, because they don't have that underlying.
Yes, they do, Mayor.
So,
So what I would say is that what we would have to do in order to eliminate D2, because the current zoning map shows D2 as a district. There's no language that says it's an overlay district in the bylaw.
Correct.
it doesn't say what,
So
no related.
there's no language that says it's, so if it was originally was an overlay district or
Right.
100 feet only, and it was a base zone only 100 feet back, doesn't really matter. Currently, there's a map that shows a
Right,
100
shows
foot
it.
district. And so the way to correct that, if you wanted to remove the G2 district, would be to adopt a new map without that showing and pushing the whatever zone is behind the 100 feet up to the
road.
That's what I-
road. And that would be the way of correcting it, is to remove the language and adopt a new map. You know, if you wanted to keep it as an overlay zone, then you would adopt a new map that would show the same thing, but you would adopt an overlay district map, or you fix the language in here to say it's an overlay district and it's 100 feet.
But the problem with the whole zone is, again, it was based on the structures that existed in 1991 when it was passed. And that's just a really poor way to do zoning as time goes on. So the only way you could do the two family, you know, so people would buy two lots together and be able to make 4 units. Because 2 per existing structure, you didn't have to keep the structure, but it's just, it's very complicated. I believe the condos that were built out on the Pleasant Street section towards School Street are not legal because they went more than 100 feet back.
Well, they're not legal because they're not attached.
Yeah, but, you know, so that, I think it's just a very complicated, it's a very complicated zoning thing, and I just, since we have if we want to add more multifamily housing to different sections,
Do
do
it
it
that
as
way.
multifamily housing, not as this convoluted.
is this something we can do in the spring? I don't know. This sounds more complicated even than the downtown.
Yeah.
No, it's not that complicated.
Well, so then are you saying that, so take Pine Street, that because the district behind those lots is A, that if anybody wanted to, so say there's a vacant lot,
Where on Pine?
let's just pick Pine, not in the MBTA overlay, let's
Okay.
pick it by,
There are no
Pleasant.
vacant lots.
but let's just say. Or somebody takes a house down and wants to. Let me think about this, but whatever, so now you've got, A is a much bigger lot requirement and different setbacks.
And A was there.
I'm just asking.
Oh, no, but let me explain. All of the districts that are there were created before the D2 was put on top. So every lot in Pine Street was in District A and theoretically needed 22,500 square feet for a lot. And this is merely just a segment to say we're gonna allow 2 family houses within 100 feet of the street.
Right, but the way the bylaw reads is it's not an overlay, it's now a new district. So I'm just trying to say that, so if somebody either took down a house, say we passed something like this, somebody took down a house, now they have different setback requirements if it's A than if it was
No.
D2.
They had to have a house that was built before D2 went in
No,
order
no,
to do anything.
No, I'm saying, what if we pass something like this, what you're describing, right?
Yeah.
We get rid of D2,
Right,
now it's A.
so it's the way it was before D2
Okay,
was
never
added.
mind, I don't want to ask my
It
question.
was exactly the way it was before D2 was added.
Okay,
And all the houses had to be built before D2 was added.
So the simple thing to do, if it is simple, is simply to change the map and if you eliminate the two on the map.
Yeah.
Then you don't even have to change the language because there would be no
Well,
map, no.
No, you have to
No,
eliminate
you
D2.
have to eliminate all the references
Yeah.
to D2 in the bylaw as well.
And the table
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
because then that would be
Yeah.
confusing even more so.
so we'd have to change the use table.
Yep.
We'd have to touch it everywhere that it touches in the bylaw.
Okay, is that a fall town meeting thing or is it? I'm thinking fall on
I've
that
got
one.
to talk to the assessor about
Yeah,
getting the map change. for the company.
The assessor's records are all wrong.
I know that.
Yeah, and then going this, trying to figure out how much is.
Okay,
It may not be a lot, but
It would be a lot to take up
at
at a
spring,
town meeting or also passing the town budgets.
yeah, that's what I
Right,
think.
I agree with that.
I think we push this one because it's confusing. It's also even though it's actually quite simple, it's potentially.
That's
But
what
on
I
the
was
other
just
hand, I
thinking.
think your point is that we've got multifamily, we don't need to have it.
Well, and we've never had a D2 project come before the ZBA without an enormous number of complaints
Yeah.
from the abutters.
Yeah, so
And it's always been by developers. So it's not popular with the residents.
maybe if we don't do commercial, we'll do that one. Trade one off. Okay, and site plan review applicability, what was that one?
so right now, your site plan review, what kicks it off is adding more than a certain number of parking spaces. Almost every other city in town, site plan
Yes.
review is kicked off by the size of the development. So if you're building multifamily, 3 or more units, usually that kicks off site plan review.
That does with the charts, yeah.
If you're, exactly, that's why we did that. Also, if you are, building commercial or, and I've seen bylaws everywhere from like 500 square feet of additional commercial space up to, 1,500. There's usually some sort of small amount they're allowed to do without having to go to site plan review. Like if a store needs to build a little addition in the back for another walk-in cooler, or something like that, that doesn't usually kick off site plan. But, so there's usually some sort of number that kicks off site plan review for commercial development as well as land alteration for commercial purposes. Like if someone has a big woodlot and they're clearing several acres, that usually doesn't kick it off. But if it's a commercial property that they're gonna permit for, do some work on, then you're gonna alter more than an acre or half an acre, depending on the community, they have different sizes. So that often kicks off site plan review, so that if they're, let's say, building a parking lot or a temporary park, like beach parking, someone owns a lot and they want to do beach parking with a shuttle, then that would, they're not building a building, but they're doing land alteration, then that would kick off site plan.
So the current site plan applicability, any new development, expansion or change of use other than single family or 2-family residence, which would, under the parking schedule, require 5 or more parking spaces regardless of the number of parking spaces pre-existing.
So you,
That's the only trigger,
Yeah.
plus the new multifamily.
Right.
So that seems to me to be a fairly simple, that's a number 1, add 2 and 3
Mhm,
for applicability. So can you draft something?
yep,
I mean, and that is consistent with the increasing oversight over the kinds of. That seems to me fairly simple to draft something.
yeah.
So do we want site plan review on the by right ADUs? They mentioned
Can't.
that,
Yeah,
I thought it
If
said,
you do site plan review on the ADUs, you have to do
Do on
site plan
single
review
family.
on every residence.
so what you'd have to do with a single family.
Yeah,
I don't think that would be too popular.
No, I didn't.
okay,
Might not be a bad idea.
If you want to be Nantucket.
any other comments from the public on potential zoning changes for Springtown meeting? Not seeing any. Okay, discussion of general bylaws on driveway entrances.
That's the fire department thing.
Well, so if you recall, we put the review of bylaws into the general bylaws from zoning. And we had some criteria, and then we did regulations. We did, I believe, pass the regulations in December of 2023. I don't know if they ever got properly
so,
posted. I sent them anything.
so they were, yes, so what you sent me was actually dated
November.
January 8th, and they were passed on
December.
January
Oh,
22nd.
okay.
But yes, they were discussed on
Yeah, okay.
the date you said, but, so they were, passed at that time.
And so this has come up for a couple of reasons. One is that it seems that there are on occasions curb cuts, which is not driveway entrances, curb cuts that seem to be slipping through the cracks. Where and the general bylaw does not have a provision under any circumstance for 2 curb cuts to a property, I think.
Well,
It's
Yeah.
vague.
it's vague, because it says 1 curb cut, but then it talks about a special permit,
Permit.
but doesn't say it's for second entrances.
So certainly if a property is gonna have 2 entrances, or that it's not perpendicular to the street or the criteria, then it is supposed to come to us for a special permit, and that in some cases has not happened. And so I think what Greg has advised is that when we are aware of a circumstance where that's the case, the planner needs to notify the owner, and tell them they need to come for a special permit. And even if the driveway is already built, and we need to remind the DPW and the building inspector that that's the case. That's the first thing. And then if there are modifications or clarifications, then we should make those as well. But so those are kind of 2 separate things. One is enforcement. And Greg has advised, because we are the special permit granting authority, when we see one that should have a special permit. There was a correspondence about 126 School Street. That came to us, or at least came to me and to Mark.
Us.
Did it came to everybody? Okay. So I think that on the very, at least on that issue, we should issue so if you haven't looked at 126 School Street, they had a long driveway that went alongside their house, and you had to back out onto School Street. They somehow created a loop so that they could pull out onto School Street, that loop around by the front door, but it created a second curb cut. I'm not sure how they did that without, did they just I don't know what happened to the sidewalk. I haven't looked in detail about the sidewalk or the actual curb or the slopes or anything. I just have driven by it. So it seems to me that that case is, should have come to the planning board as a special permit and that we should send them a letter at the very least. Is anybody have an objection to that?
So could you go through what the process is again? So if a resident, a neighbor, whomever says, hey, my neighbor's putting in a driveway and I don't think it's legal, they go to the town planner, and then the town planner contacts the resident, and then they come here, and is it the DPW that then inspects the curb cut after it's done? I know they do it when they're the approving authority, but do they do it when the planning board is the special permit? I just don't know what the process is.
Yeah, so it basically says all new and relocated driveway entrances for all land uses shall require a permit issued by the Department of Public Works. So the Department of Public Works issues driveways. But then later it says there shall be not more than one apron and curb cut per residential lot. So to do a second one, it's basically silent.
I think further down, I don't have it in front of me, it says, yeah, if it's something that the DPW can't permit, they send it to the planning board.
That's correct.
Yeah,
So, but that's a case if they went to the DPW, if somebody doesn't go to the DPW, and so it's just an illegal driveway, and a
Right.
neighbor says, hey, where's your permit? And there's no permit. I'm just trying to figure out where is it laid out for residents to know what the process is and for planning board members to know what the process is.
It's not.
Well, residents should go to DPW if it's a driveway, and DPW should say, not our problem. Send it to planning board.
Well, but
An
I
appropriate-
thought Sarah just said, go to the town planner. That's why I'm trying to question the
Well,
process.
I think that in the case of this particular one, it's obvious that it didn't come to us, and it's obvious that you can drive by it. However we find out about it, you can look at it, that it has
Under your regulations, they have to go to DPW first,
first.
yeah.
and if
And-
DPW denied
and
the permit
permit.
in writing.
So if they didn't go to DPW, then DPW needs to, maybe it's Chuck and Mark need to reach out to this homeowner and say, you didn't get a permit.
Yeah.
And the permit,
And they go to
and then
DPW.
DPW and DPOW denies it and it comes
Correct.
here. So I
So
think
who's
that
the enforcement in town though? So like the building inspector is the enforcer
for zoning,
for zoning, and so if he drives by a house and was like, whoa, I didn't approve that. But does DPW, because they drive around town, do they see driveways that they didn't permit and say, hey, you gotta, what's the communication?
I
The
don't,
bylaw is silent on that.
Yeah, that is silent
And
on that.
so in talking with Greg today about it, his opinion was this should be moved to the zoning bylaw. It's still,
No,
well,
Yeah.
because you already have an enforcement officer.
Yeah.
And that some of the language should be clarified as well. a
if
little
that were the
bit.
case, every town would do it that way, and they don't.
But,
Well, we just move this to the
yeah,
general
I
bylaw.
know you do.
Yeah.
I fully understand.
we're not perfect.
Yes.
We'll be the only town that does it that way.
But
No,
Well,
because
but
I
still-
researched that.
No, so did I.
Well, most towns don't have planning boards issuing them permits for driveways. It's all handled administratively by Public Works.
Exactly.
No, and that's,
And
I have a
that's-
sheet, I can send it to you.
Well,
It's,
I'm sure there are other communities, but the number of communities is probably rather small.
I know Laura has a point, but my question on this particular case is they cut the sidewalk. There's a side, I believe.
No,
There is no sidewalk?
It's just
Oh.
right onto School Street.
Okay, so they didn't, there's no curb. There's no
There was
curb.
curb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, go
They
ahead,
didn't
Laura.
cut a curb.
I was only going to say that, And this, I mean, this regulation says, town clerk forwards the application to DPW, copy sent to the building inspector. If the building inspector is generally our enforcement agent, then why not have all that kind of correspondence come from the building inspector? DPW seems like the wrong
Because
way
he-
to have, yeah, to be.
Because Paulo Orlando sent an email saying does not enforce curb cuts.
But it's.
Maybe he doesn't now, but maybe he should be the enforcement agent.
Well,
for-
and then Greg said he doesn't, so that's why
I
we're
didn't
here.
see any of this correspondence. I was just trying to finish my train of thought. That said, maybe the building inspector is the right place for enforcement letters, citations and things to come from, rather than, do I get it from the DPW? Do I get it from the planning board? Do I get it from the ZBA? Maybe it's just the building inspector. Might be a practice that we could consider. In conversation with the building inspector, obviously.
We
of the
did
town.
get an appeal to the ZBA.
Hmm?
We did get. a
Yeah, appeal
driveway
years on,
appeal to the ZBA.
yeah.
That
So-
the DPW had issued.
Can I suggest at least that you, Mark, sit down with Chuck and the building inspector to start and say, at least, like, until we change this,
Mhm.
how do we enforce this? And how do we become notified and at least figure out how to use what we have to achieve the outcomes that we are intending, which is DPW oversight unless it doesn't meet the criteria, and then it comes to the planning board. That was the intent. For safety and, in order, but, clearly, and it does seem to me personally that DPW probably could notice that there's on a main street, like, it's pretty obvious that one, I don't know, maybe it went in overnight, I don't know.
No,
But-
they certainly found ice on the street that a contractor had pumped onto the street. And they took action on it. I mean, so they drive around all the time and they know
Right.
what's going on.
Right, but, but maybe the person who found the ice on the street is not this chalk grenade, I don't know.
It was DPW people.
I know, but.
Somebody called and complained.
So, so maybe we can start with Mark and Chuck and Paul having a conversation and try to figure out what the right course of action is. And on this particular case, do you guys talk, figure out who's gonna send them a letter, and then let's have them follow the process and not just ignore it. What we don't wanna do is have people just ignoring the process. Whether it's a good process or not, if it's a bad process, we should change it, but we do have, we've labored over this too many hours, if you ask me, but, yeah, so. Okay, so is that a good next step? Okay. Next topic is open
sorry.
meeting law.
So the fire chief sent documents of how, this was just in the meeting packet, so I don't know what the context or what the email was, but what the fire chief is saying on here, looking for, does not match what's in our bylaw. So I think it merits a discussion at some point.
Here's what I think should happen. If his requirements are less strict than what's in the bylaw, we don't have to do anything.
No,
And
they're
if
more
More
strict.
strict,
They're more strict.
then I think we have to probably change our regulations.
So we have a minimum width of 8 feet. And this says 10 feet, and then, and if it's 100 feet or more, it's 12, so our numbers are off. And so
Yeah.
I would like to engage with him and, he's the expert, so I think that is a bylaw that's gonna have.
I
to
think
be
Mark
changed.
should go meet with the fire chief and.
I'll add him to the list.
Yeah. Just have okay,
Good night and good luck.
thank you. You don't want to form a task force on.
Come back for breakfast.
Okay, the next, item on the, agenda is an open meeting law complaint from Mary Foley dated January 8th. We acknowledge the receipt of that complaint. We need to review it and, possible response. So in your packet is the complaint, town council's, advice, and a draft response. The open meeting law does require that we, discuss it in public within 14 days of receipt, so that it qualifies. And, you've read, you have access to the material. Mary, do you want to, say anything?
Sure. So I did not submit it earlier because I didn't want the planning board to have to make an emergency meeting over the holidays. But when these two site visits were discussed, I think that was the meeting I missed, and I got an email saying that these were gonna happen. And so I looked for the public meeting posting, and there was none. So I emailed the town planner and the chair of the planning board and said these meetings need to be posted. The planning board has always posted sidewalks. And I was told that they do not. So I did not attend those site walks because in my opinion, it's an open meeting law violation. I first and foremost submitted the open meeting law request because I did try to get the meeting posted and I was told they just simply weren't going to post it. My concern is the lack of transparency and open government for residents to attend these. This is why we've always posted them. To attend these site walks and observe and ask questions if they want to. 7 Central, I'm sure will be greatly discussed with residents as I get many questions. So residents have no idea these things are happening. So that's first and foremost why I did this, is because I don't think we are serving residents the way we should be. I reached out to the Attorney General's office via email, and this is what the response. I won't read all of it, but I'm happy to forward it. A public body must post notice of all meetings, GLC 30A, section 20B. The open meeting law defines meeting as a deliberation by a public body with respect to any matter within the body's jurisdiction. Let's see, I'm just trying to skip. They define deliberating, which is defined broadly in the law, including by asking questions during the site visit. Then the site visit must be open and accessible to the public, and notice must be posted. I noticed in the response that Sarah had drafted that perhaps a quorum of planning board members did not show up. But when the meeting was scheduled and planned, of course, we assume, just like with a planning board meeting, that a quorum will show up. So if a quorum is there and planning board members ask questions, and as they say in the email to me, all site walks should be posted public meetings. So, yeah, those are my concerns, that we're not doing what we've always done, again, for the past 8+ years. And now all of a sudden we're not letting residents know what the planning board is doing.
Okay, thank you. As you can see from the advice from council, she said sidewalks, it's in her opinion that sidewalks actually do not need to be posted. I think Mary is correct that we have historically posted them. So like any other, I think we can intend to post them. There may be circumstances that make it more difficult to post them. I'm not sure this is one of this. I can't remember the circumstances of this particular one, but you know, something comes up at the last minute, or somebody wants their property to be private. In terms of a sidewalk is another example that the council gave us. And I just also want to point out that we didn't make any decisions nor do we ever make decisions at a sidewalk. We make the decisions in the hearing, which is posted. So it's posted on, you know, as a public meeting, and also hearing special permits or permits are noticed, so they do have a higher level of notice than ours, than tonight's meeting, for example. So I think it's unfair to say that the public doesn't have an opportunity to comment on the matter at hand, but in the case of 9 Proctor Street, for example, we opened a public hearing, we closed a public hearing, we made a decision, and we heard from a neighbor at that hearing. So an example of that a neighbor did participate in the process. So that's all I'll say about that. I guess I would like authority to send the response to Mary Foley as drafted. I'd like a motion for that.
I'll move it.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Nice.
Okay, Mary abstaining, I think.
Oh, yeah, because I mean, to be transparent, I will get that, and then my complaint, again, because of the not wanting to call an emergency meeting, was at 31 or 32 meetings instead of the 30. So now people listening will know, since they didn't know, that the site plans weren't posted, so I'm sure there'll be open meeting law violations submitted, and I will submit mine to the Attorney General. I didn't hear that the planning board felt bad about not being open and transparent, and would, of course, post public meetings, and so disappointing for me. We're here for the residents, not for our own conveniences, so I'll pursue it.
So I would just like to say, I was really sad to see this open meeting law filed. It just seems like part of the tension that we have on the planning board, and that perhaps is perceived by people watching our meetings, is we don't attempt to bring this up in a cordial way and have a discussion about it. And to me, that would have been the right way to handle this, particularly in light of the response we received from council that site walks do not have, legally, they do not have to be posted, regardless of what past practice has been. So I'm sad that you took that route.
I will say that Mary did email Mark and me her concern in advance of the sidewalk.
Yeah, so I did try to take the cordial way and say, we need to post for this. I'm taking guidance from the Attorney General. I know I can appreciate that town council looks out for the town and doesn't want to expose the town. I am taking the Attorney General's advice on this one. And the timing of meetings wouldn't allow me to discuss it at a meeting and then have time to submit an open meeting law violation. So if we had met 2 weeks after that, I would have brought it up there, but the timing wasn't there. And so, yeah, I think I did my due diligence in trying to get it posted, but it didn't happen.
Well, I think, so let me just chime in a little bit. So in many cities and towns, they don't, different boards, some do, some don't, even here. Some do, some don't post. We've had one posted site visit, which was the CST, since I've been here. Didn't seem, I wasn't aware of there being a policy that the planning board does post all site visits. Some boards do, like CBA, and others don't. So I think it'd be better if we just discussed. Right now, I still don't have a direction. You haven't discussed whether you want to follow town councils. I haven't seen that email, so you're taking, perhaps, I don't know what context it's all written in and what was sent to the AG and how he responded. So I don't want to say he's right, council is right, but there's, the board should discuss whether moving forward you want to post site visits.
Right.
So-
I did ask the council if we should commit in the letter back to Mary, to post sidewalks in the future. I don't have a problem with posting them. And she advised that we should not in writing commit to something that on some occasions is difficult or people are sick, or, I mean, the dates of posting can be challenged, postings get messed up, and that given that it is, in her opinion, one of the exemptions for posting, she said, but I think from my perspective, we should try to post sidewalks. As has
Yeah,
been a practice for
in
many
other
years.
communities I've been in, and it's, everybody, smaller communities knows where these applications are, and oftentimes the applicant's already been in once, and people stop by on their own to take a look at it, and so you almost never get a quorum, even if you do arrange, then, that you're gonna go out there, so.
Laura?
Yeah, just the way it seemed from the perspective of one planning board member in terms of the practice of how we set up the meeting. My recollection is that we discussed it at the end of one of these public meetings, not a public hearing, but a regular meeting in which we were all on the record. And we discussed the desire for a site walk at these two properties, and we talked about, let's try to set them up for the same day. It was on a Friday morning. People generally seemed in agreement. And then, so those members who were at the meeting talked about it, agreed on a date that worked for most people. And then I think an email followed, and some of us showed up at the meeting, a small number of us, which seemed to me at the time like how every other site meeting goes. I think the CST one was different because that felt more formal, and we had a formal presentation from the consultants and all that. We all walked together. But at the time, and sometimes I can't go to a site meeting because it conflicts with my other, take time responsibilities, but this one I could, and there were just a few people, so it just didn't feel any different to me at that time, and I don't even remember thinking about, is this sort of, are we taking some different route? Because it felt very much like the regular way of doing things. Now,
If you don't mind, I'd like to
decide.
modify our letter to make that point that we did set the date in a public meeting.
Yeah, that's my recollection.
It is, I'll look. at the
Yeah, I
date.
remember that.
Good help, good thinking. Okay, but I think it's my opinion that when that we should try to post sidewalks, but that we understand from our council that it's not a requirement. But we can't deliberate and I don't think I think a clarifying question about what tree is where is quite different than,
I think the thing that makes me sad about this is that there's an implication that we're somehow trying to conduct business
Right.
behind the scenes, which is just not the case. And I guess I feel hurt and a little bit resentful that people think that. And I guess we just have to do better to appear to be as transparent as we can be. But
Not
it certainly
appear to
doesn't
be, but
help.
be.
I think it doesn't help when accusations like this are made, which is
Not an
unfortunate.
accusation, it's a planning board member or a resident, whichever one you want to take, saying, hey, we've had standard practice of always posting to let residents know and be there. And now all of a sudden we're not, and it's for a property that we have not even opened a hearing for yet, so people don't even know it's on the radar. I think especially that address would get some interest for people to show up, and we're not giving them an opportunity. And so again, when the AG's office said, yes, we consider asking questions as deliberation, then,
No, I
I
understand,
have
I
constantly,
understand.
through all of my time here, said open and transparent, and we're here for the residents, and et cetera, and, I don't go around getting my feelings hurt so easily, but I would look at it more that, we can do better, we should do better, and why wouldn't we?
Okay, thank you. Are there any, I'm gonna move on to the next topic, any liaison reports? Yeah, have
So
meetings, oh,
there's-
downtown.
I can say the downtown improvement, Mark's participated, they are all over the idea of retail downtown Boston with GAR on, as you might imagine. It was a good hour and a half discussion back and forth. Mark was dying on the end of the phone, but he stuck his way through. We talked about residents, residential, commercial on the first floor. You build it, they don't necessarily come. GAR stated multiple examples of how that is not the case, how that is the case, that you may build it. He's had many buildings he's done. They said you have to build residential above and you have to put retail on the first floor. Nobody occupied. He actually, what they moved in they moved a town department into some of the residential, into the retail units, just so they could have some activity at the storefront. So it's very much, we got a little bit, the conversation actually was quite vivid. It was great discussion. Marlene was on the phone talking about signage and difficulty with that, and residential and commercial, and it was, and they all came. Marlene actually at the end of the meeting just said, we gotta do something about this. We just can't keep talking about it week after week, month after month. How do we do that? Let's get bathrooms downtown. Let's make it a
That sounds like
priority.
That's moving along.
Done, let's get it done. So it was quite good.
Okay, good.
The CPC is meeting this Thursday. We have a list of applications for CPC funding. The list is on the website. I would encourage you to look at it, and we'll make our preliminary recommendations, I think, after the meeting.
One of which is that one of the downtown improvements.
Well, so the lighting, you know about you're talking about the
I
lighting?
know about the lighting. I definitely do.
Okay, we were sorry about that, but.
The Harbor Management Committee is sort of finished its work doing, gathering input through surveys. We got actually like 400 survey responses, and then public forums, and now will be sort of between now and sort of June, July, kind of coming up with recommendations. So this is sort of now the real work. Our next meeting is Wednesday, the 21st, next Wednesday, 21st, 22nd.
Second.
22nd. Virtual and in person. So anybody's interested? Any other?
ZBA has not met for a while. We meet also on the 22nd.
Okay, anything else? Okay, great. Correspondence, I think we already went over. Any other public comment? I hear none.
So as part of the correspondence, we did get the email from Elizabeth Thomas that I think the board should discuss, about the blasting and the special permit conditions. So, okay, nobody's gonna, so we all got the same email, a couple emails, and
I'm sorry, but I only saw one.
I don't.
Having trouble
saw
with
one
this
too
stuff.
about
So-
Early blast before they had.
Right before Christmas.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
So
Christmas morning
4
or
days,
something, yeah.
if I'm correct, it was 4 days before Christmas and it was 20 minutes of 10.
Yes.
So I'm not, do I remember that correctly?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was
so,
one blast.
so. Yes, that's my understanding too, and, so we had done the, special permit with conditions of blasting between the hours of 10 and 2. And I guess the residents over there got a text saying a blast would happen at 9:20 and it ended up happening at 9:30. So again, I'm, going from her email, and then she sent the second one with some of the documentation of when the blast occurred.
That's what I didn't see, that second one.
Did you get the second one? Did you get?
I don't remember again.
I don't get a second one.
Yeah, I just remember that first one, but I'll look again.
But anyway, as a board, I don't know if the town is doing anything. And so since this is our special permit and we put the conditions in, what do we do? What does the town do when a special permit condition is violated?
I don't know what this town has done in the past, but usually in other communities, the building inspector in charge of enforcement would approach the party and ask them to correct it. In this particular case, the fire chief talked to CST, who indicated that they would not do any blasting until after 10. So moving forward, that's been corrected. Someone didn't relay the planning board condition to main drilling and blasting. So was my understanding.
So I think the question, so I think if we take it as factual that there was a blast before 10, based on the email we received, and that we previously had CST say we wouldn't blast before 10, and it was a condition in the permit that we're still getting the final attachments to, but nonetheless, I think we can agree that CST knew that blasting should not occur before 10. The question I think before us is, if we assuming that that's the case, is it a violation that warrants some sort of an action? And what would that be? You're saying that there's an action that reminding them.
Usually the action
subsequent.
is don't do it again, or
Yeah.
correct whatever it is, whether it's a drainage problem
Yeah.
or because oftentimes in towns with lots of site plans, it's things like drainage or other types of things that are in violation. And, you approach them and ask them to correct it, and hopefully they do, and that's the end of it. And so in this case, the fire department has reached out to CST, who informed the blasting company that it's 10 o'clock is people and not to blast before 10. So, so the corrective action has happened.
So from the correspondence, the residents have not been, so it sounds like maybe the town talked to CST. Would that be Paul Orlando?
No, the fire chief.
Fire
The
chief.
fire chief is the one who.
So then when does it get conveyed to the concerned residents that send emails that this is what transpired and this is the fix, so to speak? There just doesn't seem to be communication then back to the residents that have had a complaint.
I could talk to the fire.
I mean,
chief
like-
about.
Like poor Elizabeth said in her email, she's like, feels like she's talking to herself, and I would have to agree to her, I guess from these responses, it does sound like she's talking to herself. I just think we can do so much better with communication. Residents are sending emails, and I had not checked my emails all during the holidays, and so it was 2 weeks or so after she had sent it. I was under the broad assumption that she had heard many responses because it was to the select board and the planning board, and that the town had resolved the issue, and she said she had heard from nobody. So, I mean, we keep saying, oh, we want people to send us emails and tell us, what they're thinking or ideas or complaints or whatever else, and then we just ignore them.
Chief McNally, go ahead, McNeely.
Hi, good evening. Just to weigh in on this, the initial email I got from Ms. Thomas was to state that it was a violation of the Route 128 blasting within the footage of the highway that required a special DOT permit. The blasting that occurred on the 20th was not part of that special permit. It was outside of that area. And the fire department was not aware of the special permit from the planning board. We do have a detail on site every day. And going forward, I can tell you that we will be sure that the planning board special project or special permit requirements are met.
And can you communicate that back to Ms. Thomas?
Yes, I believe that's already been done. I can confirm that's been the case.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you. And then what is the planning board's communication process when we do a special permit or conditions to get to the right town departments, to the fire, to the police?
So
to
once it's recorded with the clerk, then copies are distributed to the appropriate departments. So so if it's like something approving a new driveway or roadway, that would be distributed to Public Works. Something, a site plan that involves a large site plan like this, you would pretty much copy all departments so that they're aware of it. So again, it would happen at that point. We're still waiting on one of the attachments that goes along with the approval. So it hasn't been filed and distributed, and that's where the chief didn't know. about
Holiday.
yeah, the 10 o'clock. Right.
So can I ask one, and thank you for that, Fire Chief. Can I ask one follow-up question? So we're regulated on number of days where this has to be filed with the town clerk and then with the Register of Deeds. So if that's the process, the fire and chief would have had this mid-December. So I think the, and I'm just looking at the MassGov chart for this. So if the special permit was approved on November 25th, 2 weeks from that would get you to, the first week in December, and then the 20 days to the clerk. So it would be like December 13th or whatever. So why didn't that process happen?
We're waiting on some of the attachments in order to file it with the clerk.
So we haven't even filed yet?
No. Except
So holidays, we had sickness, we're waiting for attachments from it.
No, I understand all that, but I mean, the law is the law. It says 14 days, right? So what does the town do when they're just out of compliance with that?
Unless the applicant my understanding is that unless the applicant wants to challenge the fact that we haven't filed the approval within a certain date, if they don't, then the town, once we file the approval, then that's effective. So in this case, the applicant is being cooperative and always has been ever since they filed their original application. So they're doing their best to get us the information.
So they can't do anything until it gets to the Registry of Deeds, is that correct? So are they just on hold except for the blasting?
Yeah, well,
They're not doing much.
they're not doing anything. It's middle of winter.
Earth removal. I mean, I think realistically, the holidays you have, the law is the law, but you have the holidays, we had EOHLC filing was December 18th, I think, something like that. So in reality, it's an understandable, and Mark has been working on it, we've been, so.
Are you done? Can I ask one other question? Regarding, so what is the expectation of us when we receive an email from a resident as far as responding in the capacity of a member of the planning board? Is there an expectation? A requirement? Is there anything?
There's not a requirement,
Right.
there's a.
I mean, what should we do? What should be the,
So
we can't all respond, right?
And we should not.
we should not respond individually, and if we do,
Yes, we
if
should.
you only do it personally and say not on behalf of the planning board.
Right.
Yeah.
The planning board can only act if at a meeting, we all say, we'll like Mark to draft a response and authorize her to sign. Otherwise, we're just acting on our own behalves.
Yeah, I think that it is my opinion that it is kind of unreasonable for people to expect a response to everything. I mean, we get, on some topics, we get a lot of emails, so I think it's, actually, a little bit unfortunate, because I understand that, people want action, but, think about how many emails we receive about, we received on the MBTA zoning, and I read them all. I mean, we, I don't know, it's a hard issue. in my
So I think
opinion.
that's why I've been pushing, it's important to talk about them at the meeting, so
Mhm.
that we are addressing
Yeah.
what we're getting.
Acknowledging.
Acknowledge them. I mean, yeah, I think, yes, go ahead, Laura.
It seems to me that the planning board makes a special condition and that gets, drafted in a final decision, but then this is an issue of enforcement.
Right.
And so whether that be the fire chief or the building inspector, and the building inspector, points it to the fire chief. That seems like having a clear route for residents to go to take a complaint. Now something is, it's gone through the planning board made a decision, put these conditions in, but the conditions aren't being met. There should be a clear route to say to the building inspector, I see a violation here, and then the building inspector, perhaps we need to have fines when rather than just say like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't, it didn't, mistakes happen, I understand that, but there can also be consequences in terms of fines and things that put a little bit more, a little bit more of a stick about, let's be careful, because CST did know the rules. They could have immediately put those into their standard operating procedure. The contractor should have communicated that with their subs.
Can you add that to the list of the DPW Paul Orlando meeting and the fire chief, and report back to us on that? I think that's a good point, Laura. Okay, any other items? Take a motion to approve. Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
I'm thinking
all in favor? Okay, so going forward, we are gonna have some homework to try to look at some of these things. Mark will, so we have the same list.
Thank you. So our next meeting
Our next
is-
meeting in 2 weeks.
27.
And then will it be every 2 weeks or it depends on the month?
It's the second and fourth.
Okay, all right.
And that's the whole year,
Yeah.
looks like it's.
Yeah, and I think we don't, the Monday holidays are not the second and fourth for either President's Day or Martin Luther King. movement this year.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Walk.
Yeah, sure.
I know, they're really great for walking at night, let me tell you.
Be you.
Yeah, that's the point.